Hey guys, this is Frank Yecker, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
Hey, this is Rich Franklin.
What's up, everybody? This is Chris Lieben. This is Diego Sanchez. Randy Couture.
Alistair Overeem.
Hi, this is Stephen Bonner.
This is Don Fry.
Hey, I'm Phil, Mr. Wonderful Davis.
TJ Dillashaw.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Welcome to another episode of Submission Radio. Dennis Skradov here with Kasper Rosalowski. On the 30th of October, we are back, baby. It's great to be back, isn't it, Cass?
Yeah, I say this all too often, man. We need to do more shows, but it is great to be back. I've been pumped, I've been excited, and I've missed it, man. I've really missed doing this. So we are back. We've got some sexy guests on the program this week. Bas Rutten returns. It's always fun times when Bas Rutten comes on the show. There's actually a lot to talk to him about. Has been doing some movie action. Inside MMA is no longer. There's some crazy stuff like UFC 205, GSP happening. There's a lot that we're going to be speaking to Bas Rutten about. Johny Hendricks is coming back to the program. This is a guy that we've wanted to get on the show for a long time. I mean, things have not been going well for Johny Hendricks, but he does have a big fight coming up at UFC 207, which is a huge card, and he's facing Neil Magny. So we want to talk to Johny Hendricks about all his weight issues and things like that. Tim Kennedy, haven't had Tim on the show for a while. We actually spoke to Tim a couple of days ago. He's obviously fighting at UFC 205 against Rashad Evans. What a huge fight. Can't believe it's on the prelims, but there's a lot to discuss with Tim Kennedy. A quick note, it is obviously pre-record. We had a few audio issues with Tim Kennedy at the start. We had to call him up on Skype after about halfway through the interview, so bear with it. Hopefully you can stick through the subpar audio at the start. It does get crystal clear towards the end, and Tim has a lot of interesting stuff to say. Then, Karim Zidan. He's a guy that we've had on a couple of times on the show. He is the inside man on anything to do with Russian MMA and anything to do with MMA on the Eastern Bloc. This whole Fedor situation where Fedor's daughter was attacked, what's happening with Fedor, the crazy Chechen leaders. Karim is going to be doing a sort of long-form appearance with us to talk all about those things. A lot of interesting stuff. And then, another debut on Submission Radio to discuss things. Who's coming on the show, Dennis? We've got another guest, don't we?
That's right, Cass. Mike Dyce is going to be making his Submission Radio debut. I'm so excited to have him. He's from Extra Rounds Podcast and Fansided MMA. He'll be joining us to talk about this GSP Bisping fight. Is it going to happen? What else has to happen at UFC 206? Is it pay-per-view worthy? We're also going to be breaking down a whole bunch of stuff, including Uriah Faber's retirement, our favorite memories of him, and one of the most important things of the episode, we're going to be giving you guys a top 5 Tom Cruise movies. That's right. What's the number 1 movie that we think Tom Cruise has done? Find out at the end of the episode. Me and Kasper are going to be giving you guys a Jack Reacher 2 review as well, letting you know if it's worthwhile checking out the cinemas and going to watch the movie. But Cass, like you mentioned, a big episode of Submission Radio. Just a quick reminder, everybody jump on Twitter and follow us at Submission AUS, and of course on Facebook, jump on, give us a like, facebook.com/Submission Radio AUS. Without further ado, we have our first guest on the line. It feels so good to say that, Cass, and I believe you're about to introduce him.
All right, guys. Our next guest is a former UFC welterweight champion. He now returns at UFC 207 on a massive card against Neil Magny, and he's got a very interesting story these days. Johny Hendricks, welcome back to Submission Radio. How's it going?
I'm doing great. You?
No, we're doing very well, and thank you for joining us on the program. I mean, we spoke to you last, I think, at UFC 200, and I mean, everything seemed like it was going to plan, and then, of course, the weight cut ended up being a major issue for you. When we saw you at the early weigh-ins, it looked like you were ready, and you gave everything to make that weight cut. For fans who didn't really hear about what happened afterwards and what went wrong, can you tell us what exactly did go wrong? What went wrong with that weight cut?
Really we were excited about the early weigh-in, but I should have known, for example, whenever you go to sleep and you wake up and you try to start moving again, it's hard. It takes twice as long to get your body to sweat again. So what I should have done is I should have pushed maybe an extra 30 minutes that night and got the weight off. Instead, what I did is we said, hey, let's just get it off tomorrow. And whenever I did that, that sort of cost me, that quarter of a pound, because whenever I started running and everything, it took me longer than I expected to get a sweat started. And once you hit that stage, you're sort of, and you only have from 8 till 10 o'clock. Now, if I would have had it, until 4 o'clock, I would have made weight. I would have lost that 1/10 without having to do anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
But since they did switch it, like I said, it's my fault. And whenever I went to bed thinking that I could float a little bit more than I did, and I didn't. So I had to get my body moving, and it just didn't want to. It didn't want to get rid of it.
It sounds like obviously a learning experience for you, sort of as it was playing out. What was going through your mind was sort of when you're standing on those scales, thinking, "Oh man, if it wasn't for that 30 minutes, it would have been a completely different story." What was going through your mind then?
Just really at that point, you're sort of at the mercy of the scale, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can complain about it, you can do whatever you want to, but there's nothing, it's not going to change the outcome of it. So you just got to sit there and say, all right, that's over with. It's time to rehydrate and do everything. And next time, no. So this next fight, guess what? I might be a half a pound over whenever I go to bed. So that way I can wake up at 8 and see where my weight's at. I usually float 1.4 pounds the night of the weigh-ins. Usually, because I'm like 73, 74, right? Well, this time I was like 71 and a half, and then all of a sudden I woke up. I was at 71, or excuse me, I was 72 half. I was right? But I only lost like a half a pound, so it was a pound over. Where, like I said, if I would have woke up, if I'd have pushed an extra 30 minutes, I might have been 171 and a half. Then I wake up, I'm a half pound under. I go down there at 8 o'clock. I check my weight. I step on the scale. You make weight. It's over with, right? But I haven't made an 8 o'clock weigh-in since I was 24 years old. It's almost 9 years ago, right? And I forgot how difficult it is to make weight at 8 o'clock in the morning, or 10 o'clock in the morning. And like I said, that's something that will never happen again, because guess what? I'm going to push, even if that means go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning. This last time I went to bed at 10. So if I'd even pushed, until 10:30, 11, maybe that's, I get the weight off that I need to. And we're not even talking about this, but everything's a learning curve for me. Of course, I always like to take the harder road to things. I've always been that way. And, sometimes it comes back and it bites you. And, but you know what? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger and makes you better. And that's really how I'm looking at it.
I mean, a lot of people wondering if the UFC tried to force you to move up to middleweight for this next fight that you're having at UFC 207. Did anyone say anything to you about it? Or did anybody contact you and trying to get you to move to middleweight? Or did you not really hear from anybody and the next fight was just put at welterweight?
Yeah, just put it welterweight. Here's the thing: if they a quarter of a pound, yeah, it's still missing weight, but it's still a quarter of a pound. And if I had to move to welterweight to do a fight over a quarter pound, then that's what I got to do. But they didn't say anything, because I think because really. A couple of the guys that are UFC guys thought that it broke whenever I was on 171, right?
What do you mean broke? As in like broke even? The weight broke even?
Yeah, like the so on a meat scale, it just got to break. Does that make sense? Got to break. Meaning that when it's touching the top of the scale, if it breaks any, then you make weight. Okay, that's how you make weight. But but they're not the people who get to judge it.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? They're not. So just because, they may want me to make weight, who knows? And that's that's like I said, the scale, you live and die by the scale, but a quarter of a pound, I'm not even worried about it because, right now I'm under 200. I still got 10 weeks to train or until my fight. I'm taking it more serious. And the reason why I want to do that is because I want to, whenever I get there, I still want to lose 10 pounds like I did last time. I think I had to lose like 12 or 13. This time I want to lose 10 because I don't think it's going to hurt me now that we have so much time to gain weight back. I think it's going to, if I can be 10 over, I'll still be able to get to 186, 188 and fight.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a great fighting weight for me.
You spoke to ESPN recently, Johnny, about how after the last fight, you and your wife sat down. She said, Johnny, if you're going to fight like that, quit, because that's pathetic. And you said, I agree, that was not how I fight. I mean, that seems like a pretty full-on and confronting conversation. Was it an eye-opening moment for you when, your wife said that to you? And how difficult was it for you to hear something like coming from her?
You know what? She's my wife. Here's the thing. You're not going to meet a tougher critic than myself.
Mm.
Listen to my interview that I did right after that fight. That's not the guy who won the belt. That's the guy who's just in the motion. All right? That's the guy that's just sitting here. He's waking up, doesn't want to do a different job. He likes his job, but he's not competing at his full potential. That's what fighter has been out there. And that's the guy that y'all have seen the last two fights. And now I'm over the point where, hey, guess what? And you know what? I thought that it was a good conversation to have because, here's the thing is that if my wife's not behind me, then I'm not going to be at my full potential either. I'm a firm believer in that. I think that as soon as you get married, you become one. And the good Lord makes me, I have to listen to what she says as well. And that's why I hold her values to a high standard as well. When she tells me something, I sit there and say, all right, then this is what we got to do. Then we talk about it. All right, what do you have to do to become a great fighter again? Or to perform like I should? One, I have to become an athlete. With 4 kids, my wife is running around with like a chicken with her head cut off.
Mm-hmm.
She is everywhere. She has 3 soccer practices, 4 different soccer practices a week, right? We play soccer on Saturday. My girls play soccer on Sunday. That's not even counting having a 5-month-old boy, or 6-month now, that she has to lug around everywhere. So not only does she have to get 3 kids ready or 4 kids ready, she's got to get 3 of them to soccer games on Saturdays, and then on Sunday has to control 3 kids and get another one to practice as well. So what we compromised is on the weekends I will be dedicated and everything, but I have to become a little bit more selfish, meaning that whenever it's training time, I say, I have to train these times. I have to train. It puts her in a bind. It does. But that's where I know that I can trust her and that she's going to. She's going to keep it at home. And these last couple of fights, I didn't want to travel. I didn't want to do anything. I wanted to work out. So technically, my last 2 fights, I've only been working out once a day, 5 days a week, and that's if I don't travel somewhere, right?
Wow.
So I was only working out once a day my last 2 fights. Now I've already started 2-a-days. I've been going back to Oklahoma State, doing all those kind of things. I'm training. I'm sort of telling myself what got me to the championship, and what got me there is the mental aspect that wrestling gives me, and that Coach Smith gives me. You know, my coaches here, you know, Stephen Wright, and Tony Cabela, they do an amazing job. But the mental aspect that I need, that I want to compete with, wrestling, you can't beat wrestling.
In the same interview, I think, with ESPN, you mentioned that if you go out there at UFC 207 and lose, you'll be done with MMA. I'm curious, Johnny, do you still stand behind that statement? And could there be a scenario where you put in a good performance and still lose, where you'd still sort of consider sticking around?
No, I'm not going to be the guy that just fights to make money. Okay? The money aspect is whatever. I want to. If I'm going to fight, I want to be the best I can be at. And in those last two performances, I told my wife, I said, if I have another fight like that, I'm done. I'm not performing to my best ability, and I really do believe that. And is it that, you know, I think I got over that hump. I think the hump is that I was just going through the motions. I was okay with where I was at. I was satisfied. I was satisfied with being a UFC champion. I was satisfied with being in the top 10. You can't be satisfied in this sport. You know, the only thing I can think of is I want to win. I want to win. I want to win. I'm done being satisfied. And if I go out there and I lose another fight because I don't pull the trigger, I don't fight to my full potential, well, guess what? I'm done. I'm not gonna continue to do that. And put my wife through, you know, me being gone a lot and all those kind of things just to do something that I enjoy. Because realistically, yeah, I love training. I love the art of mixed martial arts. I love learning. But I can do that without getting punched in the face. You know what I'm saying? And so, but I think with the mindset I have right now, retiring is not my future. I think that this fight is going to be, because right now a lot of people are probably saying, is Johnny washed up? Is he gone? Is he going to lose this fight and he's going to retire? Right? That's probably what a lot of people are thinking. Johnny was something, but I still believe I can be. And I had to get that mind frame back. I had to get that mind frame back that, hey, I still have things I can do with this sport. I can still go out there and win a championship. Now, how do I do that? By busting your butt every day, waking up sore, can't move. That's what it takes in my mind. And that's sort of what I'm doing right now is, you know, there's times that you wake up, your body's aching so bad. But I just look at myself and I say, what do you want to be? Do you want to be a guy who loses this fight because you're tired and sore? Or do you want to be the guy that everybody goes, dang, he made a 180? And that's really what I'm trying to do right now is I'm trying to tell myself I can make that 180. This is how I do it.
It's a fascinating situation because obviously, I think the other thing people are sort of saying when they look at you is here's a guy who was champion, just very recently to be in a position where you're considering retirement, just a couple of years later. Do you sort of have moments where you wonder about how things change so quickly? And obviously, you're going in there to face Neil Magny to sort of stay in there and you don't want to retire. But if you do retire, never get the chance to fight for the title again or, climb the ranks, will that sort of stay in the back of your mind or bother you? Is that sort of part of your motivation here?
You know what? No, I don't need it. Won't. Here's the thing: is that once I sit there and say, all right, it's time to move on to a new chapter of my life and put my 100% focus into that, I'll still be able to be doing what I want to do and all that kind of stuff. And that's really what I'm looking at right now. And so for example, I just opened up a gym with a friend where I live in Midlothian. I'm going to start teaching wrestling. All right. And so whenever I'm doing these things, let's say I win this fight. Well, I will still teach wrestling there, but my main focus is always being a UFC champ. But let's say something happens and I can never fight again. I still want that push and desire to be able to sit there and say, hey, I will give 110% at whatever I do. You know, just because you succeeded in one area and you couldn't get back to it, doesn't mean you let it haunt you. What you do is you let it fuel you, right? So, for example, I lost my last match in NCAAs to a guy I beat 7 times. The 8th time he got me, right? Well, I used that motivation to help me become a better fighter, to train as hard as I could, and to not leave anything behind. And that's sort of what I got to remember. And that's where, like I said, the mental game is so important in everything I do, at least, right? You have to know that in my mind, I want to be the best I can be at whatever I do. And whenever I go out there and I don't fight the best I can or perform the best I can, I take it to heart and I question. I question, do you want to do this? I don't need somebody to tell me, hey, Johnny, you didn't look that good. I don't need anybody to, yeah, I do have those guys. But they usually soften up because I'm like, dude, I look like crap. There's no way that I would have won a championship fight in the way that I just had my past 2 fights, right? And I'm not saying nuts against those other 2 guys. The other 2 guys, they were tough, right? But in my mind, I'm just not fighting the way I know I can. And that's what I have to get back to. And guess what? If I can't, then it's time to say, hey, Johnny, you tried it. And that's what me and my wife talked about. Hey, you tried it. And guess what? It's just not in your cards. Maybe the good Lord has something else planned for me. And that's really my base, is that the good Lord had me. He's blessed me with a lot of things. And he blessed me with 2 national titles. He blessed me as a UFC champ. And if I never get back to it, the good Lord's going to lead me in another way where I can reach kids and maybe I can turn them into what I was. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking at.
Yeah. Well, I mean, who knows? Maybe one day you can have a championship gym yourself. Let's quickly talk about Neil Magny and touch on this matchup. I mean, Neil has a lot of height and reach. He's had some amazing performances in the UFC. How do you see this matchup? And do you have any concerns over the fact that you're a little bit smaller and will have to deal with that reach on fight night?
So I fought Carlos Condit. He's a tall guy. I fought some other guys who are tall. What I have to do, and even Stephen Thompson, whenever I fought him, like I said, the first minute was going my way. But as soon as I got into my mindset that I was going to stand in the middle, you come fight me, I can't have that. So guess what? If I'm Neil Magny, I sort of followed the game plan that Stephen Thompson did. Use your range, use your distance, and try to get me flustered, right? So guess what? What did I do the first minute with Stephen Thompson? I used angles. I kept moving. It was hard for me to get, don't get me wrong, you're going to get punched, but nothing landed cleanly because I was constantly moving. That's what I have to get back to. I have to sit there and say, all right, here's what I'm training 2 different ways, because Magny does fight. He likes to come forward. He likes to put pressure on you. Now, if that's the case, I think it's going to be a great fight because, I've fought taller guys. I've been able to hurt taller guys, and I'm okay with that. But let's say that he tries to mix it up and say, you know what? it's not going the way that I want it to, and I need to use my distance. That's sort of the fight that I'm also preparing for as well. And like I said, that's something that I didn't know about myself. What if somebody does flee? Do you lose your cool like you did against Stephen Thompson? Well, yeah, I did. So how do you fix that? You get guys who are going to do that are going to run, that are going to sit there and use their length and fight a style that gets you where you get flustered, you start over analyzing things, and you stay still. So, like I said, if I'm Magny, I look at that and say, that's what I'm going to try. I'm going to try to keep him at bay, make him where he has to analyze this, and this. And so for me, I'm thinking, all right, I use my footwork, I use my quickness, I use my explosiveness. That's how I beat Neil Magny.
Well, there you go, guys. UFC 207. Before we let you go, Johnny, because we know you've got a pad session coming up probably any second now, what's the message? What's the message you want to get out there to all the fans, all the doubters, to all the people that maybe are questioning whether you can be champion again? What's the message you want to get out there? Why will we see the best Johny Hendricks at UFC 207?
Because you know what? I'm to the point that if my wife might even say, I win this fight, and she says, Johnny, I don't like you being gone. I'd love for you to be home more. And I say, all right, baby, I'm going to do it. You know, I'm literally, I don't care what's next. I don't care about anything. I'm literally at a point in my career where I am taking it one fight. Nothing matters after December 30th. Right now, December 30th is the only thing on my radar. Nothing else. And I even have people that are like, hey, what are you going to do? I'm like, it's literally December 30th. And, you know, like Coach Smith is one of the guys that sort of told me that. He's like, Johnny, take it one fight at a time. You're spreading yourself too thin. You need to get back to what you did prior. And what you need to do is you need to focus on this guy and only this guy. Nothing else in this world matters except for this guy. And that's really what I took to heart, and that's what I'm doing.
All right, well, as we let you go, Johnny, we love to get predictions. I mean, he would have thought about Neil for quite a bit because this is a very important fight. How do you see this one playing out? How do you see yourself winning?
You know what? I see myself winning. I'm gonna go out there. I'm trying to get back to, and that's sort of my training partners. I've been telling them, once we start sparring hard, I'm going back to the old ways. I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna try to start finishing people. I'm gonna let my left hand go, and that's really what I'm looking at. Is I want to go out there and I want people to fear my hands again, and that's what I'm gonna do.
That's it. That. I couldn't have said it any better. The former champion and hopefully the man who will be the champion in the future. Johnny, we can't wait to see this new version, new and improved version, or should I say the original Johny Hendricks back at UFC 207 against Neil Magny. It's exciting times, guys. Don't forget to follow Johnny on Twitter and Instagram at Johny Hendricks. Johnny, we always love chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Hey, thank you, and y'all have a wonderful day.
Hi guys, it's Joanna Jędrzejczyk, UFC strawweight champion. Listen to Submission Radio.
All right, guys. Our next guest is one of our favorites to chat to. He is a United States Army Ranger, a sniper, a Green Beret, was awarded the Bronze Star, has hunted Hitler, is one of the most dangerous men in the galaxy. Chuck Norris prays to him every night out of fear, and he's making his long-awaited MMA return when he faces Rashad Evans at UFC 205 in New York. The equal parts deadly and funny Tim Kennedy. Welcome back to Submission Radio. We missed you, man.
Oh my God, I love that intro. I want to record that and play it every time I take my clothes off.
Every time you start to come in to watch you take a shower, you can play that while that's going on. Let's quickly talk about a little thing that we love about you, Tim. Every time we call you up, we get a hello. Now we have to find out, is that a Seinfeld? Did you get that from Seinfeld, or is that just the Tim Kennedy original?
I think it's a Tim Kennedy interview thing to start everything off awkwardly. You know, like good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm very thrilled, excited to have this conversation today. No, it's more like this weird What's wrong with this guy? We have to interview him, moment, and then we get right into it.
Yeah, we have that every single time we speak to you. But you mentioned getting into it, so let's do that because there's a lot to discuss. For a long time, you were on the sidelines, Tim, and we've spoken to you many times over the last couple of years while you were on the sidelines. And while we always hoped that you would, we never really knew whether you'd come back or not. How did this matchup actually come together? How did you go from being Tim Kennedy, the guy who's busy with movies and other projects, to Tim Kennedy, the guy who's fighting UFC 205 in Madison Square Garden?
I don't know. The UFC has, they'd come to me a few times and offered fights. But none of them were against a former light heavyweight champion. None of them were at Madison Square Garden. None of them were on the biggest MMA card in UFC history. And obviously in the very first fight in the state of New York. This is historic. And with Michael Bisping now being the champion, maybe the middleweight division is a little bit more interesting to me.
What exactly do you mean by that? Because I heard you say that, one of the reasons why you wanted to sort of come back is because Bisping is champion. What is it about that specifically that made you want to come back, of all things? Because you've already beaten Michael Bisping.
Well, he's the champion, and you're right. I have already beaten him. And I didn't only beat him. I, beat the brakes off of him. I humiliated him. I humbled him. I picked him apart every single which way. I outstruck him. I obviously destroyed him on the ground, took him down at will, passed into every single dominant position that you could wish for in a fight. I don't even know what happened that made it possible for him to be champion, but whatever stars aligned that made it, in his fortuitous fortune to get that fight, and then win it. I don't know. I think the fortune favors the bold, and I want to boldly step back into the title picture.
Well, you were away from the sport for quite some time. I'm just curious, Tim, how close were you to not returning at all? I mean, there were all the talks of you coming back and then not, and then coming back and not, and UFC couldn't really quite offer you a fight during a time when you were available. Was a part of you feeling like your MMA career might have come to an end with the UFC, or did you always in the back of your mind believe a moment like this would come where the middleweight division would favor the bold and you could come back and really capitalize on what's going on?
I thought there was a really good chance that I was never going to come back to the sport. I don't need MMA. I love fighting. Those are very different things. The sport has changed, how lucrative it is for an athlete. It's as a business owner, as a guy that, is making big budget movies now, that is in movies, that is on television, I do not need the sport. With that said, I love fighting. So I would have been fine to move on. My family, definitely, my manager, my agent, they were all thrilled, with the prospect of not having to do a fight camp, not having to deal with all of the drama that goes along with fighting, in the sport and with this promotion. So it was, I think it was just all the things lined up perfectly for me to want to get in there, at least one more time.
So with this fight, I'm wondering, are you officially back? Is this you coming back? You're part of the division, you're working towards, say, a title shot or big fights, or is that still sort of up in the air? Are you just sort of going to take one fight and who knows, we may not see you back ever afterwards again?
There's a really good chance that after this fight, you'll never see me again. If in the octagon, I'm just getting started in. I think in my work outside of the octagon, where you're going to probably see me a lot more. But after November 12th, when I beat Rashad, if whoever the matchmaker is going to be in December, for the 185 middleweight division. If they're not talking about me being in the mix, about me as a potential matchup against Michael Bisping for the title, then, he can, what's the point? If I'm not going to be in the mix for a title shot at this point in my career, where I have a win over the title, over the champion, I have, in my last, what am I, like 6-1 one of my last fights with knockout of the night, fight of the night, and my only loss being a super dumb, controversial decision. I think, I got a lot of other things to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so much stuff going on. And this is a new UFC since the last time you've stepped in the octagon. There's new champs, new stars, legends have retired, and now new owners. What do you think of the new UFC that you're coming back to, and more specifically, these new owners? I mean, a lot of people are saying big changes in the company. We saw all the cuts. A lot of employees are now gone. What do you think about that? And have you had a chance to sort of form your thoughts from dealing with some of these new people in the company?
I think it's premature to pass judgment on a company while they're in transition, and they're still definitely in transition. I'm a business owner myself, and for example, we're transitioning from the fulfillment center for one of my companies to a different one. And in that transition, there's bumps and bruises and scratches and, complaints, and transitions are tough. And we're talking about a $4 billion sale of a massive company with hundreds of employees. And I guess you don't count fighters as employees. I guess we're contractors. And then a roster of hundreds of professional athletes. It's tricky. So I think they're doing a great job of getting through the transition with minimal ass pain. But we'll see in the coming quarter how they rebound off of some of the problems.
So, Tim, UFC 205, Madison Square Garden, a huge fight with Rashad Evans. Have to get your thoughts. Being on the prelims, I mean, it seems like it is one of the biggest fights that, and it's an exciting fight as well because Rashad is coming down to the middleweight division. Do you feel okay about being on the prelims? And also talk to us about Rashad Evans as an opponent. Were you excited when you found out you'd be his first opponent in the middleweight division in the UFC?
I'm excited to be on the prelims, if you can imagine that. I'm going to be on Fox. While a lot of people are going to watch the pay-per-view, everybody that's watching the pay-per-view is going to see my fight. And then all the people that aren't going to buy the pay-per-view are going to see my fight. So in the month of November, I'm going to be hosting and starring on the TV show Hunting Hitler. I'm going to be on Fox. I'm hosting a TV show for CBS. I'm going to be on like every major network that television has in the month of November. That's fantastic, for a career. Additionally, being able to fight on 205 and the time of the night that I'm going to be fighting is ideal for kind of the training schedule and the regiment that I've been in for the past 5-6 months. That is really when I peak athletically during the day. It's when I've been hitting my training sessions. So just the convenience of fighting at that particular time is great. We're going to be anchoring one of so being on the prelims, but in a specific position of the prelims is really, really good because you're kind of like in a sprinting baton handoff. You're the anchor. You're the guy that more people are going to watch that fight than any fight of the night. So I am excited, and obviously fighting against Rashad. Rashad's a great fighter. He's a veteran, former champion. He's top 10, a perennial contender in the light heavyweight division. Ultimate Fighter, a TV show champ winner, and coming down to 185 for the first time and fighting me. We've trained. I'm actually sitting as we're talking in front of Jackson Winklejohn MMA in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and this is the place that I met him. This is the place that we trained together a few times. Not a lot, but a few times. So it's going to be, it's like he said, we're not in the friend business, we're in the fight business. I've never asked to fight a training partner, but he obviously has a few times. And so this will be fun to be able to fight somebody I've trained with previously, and I think it's a great matchup.
We've only got a couple of minutes left with you, Tim, but I'm wondering, as far as advantages, you've obviously trained with the guy. He's come off with some, I guess, notions in his mind that training session, those training sessions favored him. What advantages do you see yourself having over him at UFC 205?
Man, everything that happens in the training room is the training room. Luke Rockhold, I think, really summed it up. Like, he when people step out of the training room and talk about how well they did in the training room, they're not thinking about the fight. They're looking back towards the past. And I'm looking forward towards the fight. I remember how he felt. I remember his strength. I remember his speed. And none of that matters. I'm in the preparation for myself, getting ready for UFC 205. And, I think I'm faster. I think I'm stronger. I think I'm more durable. I honestly think my all-around kickboxing is better. He has some good footwork and some head movement and some tricky boxing. I think we're going to be a push in the wrestling department. I think he is a better collegiate style wrestler, where I might be a better MMA wrestler. I don't think he can take me down. So he's going to have to be forced with either defending my takedowns or having to deal with, I think, a different type of striker that he's ever seen. That he's, a different striker in myself that he's ever seen. I think, November 12th is going to be a really, really good night for me.
And we've spoken about the middleweight division before and how it's changed since the last time you were there. Spoke about Bisping being champion, but what do you think about what's going on in it right now? Obviously, Chris Weidman is on the same card as you, fighting Yoel Romero, someone that you have had history with, and also Luke Rockhold will be here in Melbourne fighting Jacare. And now there's all this talk of a Michael Bisping GSP fight, which doesn't look like it will happen, but it looked like Michael Bisping and GSP really wanted it to happen for UFC 206. What do you make of what's going on here, and what do you make of what happens in the division next, especially if you do beat Rashad at UFC 205?
It's not an if, first of all, but the division's a mess, man. It's a disaster. It's anybody's chance to get that next title fight, and everybody wants it because Michael, especially for me, Michael Bisping is the easiest fight in the division. The current champion of the division. If you go down that list from Chris Weidman to Jacare to Luke Rockhold, Derek Brunson, that would be my number 2, 3, 4, and 5 right there. I don't put Yoel Romero in there because I think he's a cheater and he shouldn't even be in the UFC. The Vita Belforts and Lyoto Machidas, they are so past prime. Those 4 guys would walk through him. Derek Brunson, even though he's a dark horse, I don't even know where he's ranked right now, somewhere between 7 and 9. He should be up in the top 5. Trust me, I just was training with him here at Jackson's. He should be up in the top 5. It's a mess. They're talking about Nick Diaz coming back to the middleweight division. And, GSP, who's been out of the sport, maybe even retired for the past few years, coming back and getting an automatic title shot. The division's a mess. It's anybody's game. What I know is November 12th, I'm going to go fight Rashad. I'm going to beat him in a very, very clear, decisive fashion. And Michael Bisping, he has not wanted to utter my name for the past year. He's been winning, and he might be calling out 47-year-old men that he has losses to. But who's not mentioning is me, the guy that beat him up for 25 minutes. So if he wants to stand there and really be a champion, stop calling out dudes that have been retired for a few years. Stop calling out a 47-year-old man. Why don't you fight a guy that beat the brakes off of you, and on November 12th at Madison Square Garden is going to make a huge statement in the division.
If Tim Kennedy was presented with an option, a fight with Michael Bisping, or if Michael Bisping was no longer the champion, a title fight, what would you choose more? Do you want that rematch with Bisping if he's not the champion, or do you purely want him to get that title?
I want the title.
Well, there he is, ladies and gentlemen.
Simple.
There he is. There's nothing else that needs to be said. November 12th, he takes on Rashad Evans at UFC 205. It is going to be a massive event. In the meantime, follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Tim Kennedy MMA. There is so much coming up. Look out for Raindrop and, of course, the new season of Hunting Hitler. Tim, we always love having you on the show. Thank you so much for your time. We'll see you in a few weeks in New York.
Man, can't wait. Thank you guys so much for the time.
Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Demetrius Johnson, the UFC flyweight champion of the world, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
Our next guest is one of the sport's biggest personalities. You can hear him weekly on his podcast, Rutten and Ronaldo, a former UFC heavyweight champion, 3-time King of Pancrase, openweight champion, UFC Hall of Famer. He now stars in The River Thief, a movie about a reckless teenage drifter living life on the run along the Snake River. Joining us back on the show is the one and only Bas Rutten. Bas, welcome to Submission Radio.
Yeah, you're very welcome, guys. You guys are great.
Thank you. We often think so ourselves. Let's talk about the River Thief, Bas. We've seen you in more comedic or sort of ass-kicking roles before, but this is a bit of a change of pace for you. As like Dennis mentioned, you play a more serious character in this movie. Tell us, what attracted you to the role of Clyde?
I didn't have a lot of time to say yes. So they just gave me the script. So when do they film? In 2 days? Okay. So then I went over the next day, and the next day we started shooting. So
wow.
I couldn't delve all the way in there, but Clyde was just the totally opposite of what Nico was in Here Comes the Boom. Clyde is a very bad person, a drug dealer, meth. He makes meth himself, and he has no problem. He's a sociopath. So killing people, if they deserve it, well, it's not my fault. They made the mistake, so why wouldn't I kill them? It's a very normal thing for him to do. So I thought, yeah, that would be fun to play a guy like that, to scare everybody. It was funny because I went to the premiere in Tennessee, and they, for some reason, had some kids in there. And the kids, after the show, I wanted to high-five them, but they avoided me like the plague, man. They were walking big circles around me. I tried to high-five with my hand up, but no, I couldn't get a smile from these kids. And the parents really had to say, no, he's a really nice guy. That was just a movie, So I think I did a great job. Some parents also said, I really think you're an a-hole right now. I go, okay. So I think I did it okay. Let me say that.
Yeah, that's the biggest, I guess, applause there. If the kids believe it, then you must have done a great job. Now, we mentioned it's a very, very interesting plot in this movie, and it's out in select cinemas and also available for download via video on direct services. Tell us a little bit about what fans can expect from this movie and sort of the plot of it.
This is a kid, the main called Joel Courtney. He was in Super 8, that movie from J.J. Abrams. Mm-hmm. He was one of the stars in that, and he grew up now. And this is where he tries to go in different kind of genres. And he's a drifter. He's a kid who steals everything that he wants. He has no money, but he just whatever he sees and he wants, he takes it. And then he meets this girl, and he kind of falls in love with the girl, but he doesn't know how to treat her. So he thinks that if I give her stolen stuff, that she will like me, but she knows it's stolen. So this whole confrontation goes on. He starts to make his life a little bit better. He wants to be a better person. So deep down inside, it's not a bad kid. He's looking for his father as well in this certain little village. And then this big drug deal goes down, and he happens to be there, and he steals $1 million from these two bad guys, which is Clyde and his buddy, which is my buddy also. He's a cop, but he's a very bad cop also. He's already on an investigation because he did many bad things. And, of course, now we need to find that kid. And so once we realize, wait a minute, he knows this girl. And Tommy Cash plays the brother from Johnny Cash, plays the grandfather from the girl in this. Rayleigh Kane is her name. And he, of course, wants to get involved. He tries to make the kid a little bit better. But once the bad guys start realizing, wait a minute, the kid hangs out with these two, of course, they're going to go after those people and try to use them to get the boy, bring his $1 million back.
Wow. I can't wait to check this out. I'm wondering, Bas, where are you sort of at with your acting career at the moment? Because we know that you've had a lot of positive reviews for your previous projects. You played Nico, my all-time favorite, The Men's Room in Grand Theft Auto 4. That one's always going to stay with me. But will we see you in a few more movies over the next year? And will you be looking for sort of more dramatic, serious roles like in The River Thief? Because it sounds like you kind of enjoyed this one.
I enjoyed it, but what I would enjoy mostly is just comedy action, stuff like that. Will be my fighting shooting, but, with a twist, we're always laughing, Lethal Weapon, stuff like that. I think would be very fun to do. But, if you could play one time a real bad guy, and they gave me 6 weeks to really delve into that script and really pull this really crazy character out, I would love to do that as well, of course. Now, the problem what I had the last 9 years pretty much was Inside MMA. Not the problem, it was a great show, but the problem was it shoots on Fridays and it's a live show. And many TV shows that they wanted me in for little things, they shoot their shows on Fridays. A weekly show most of the time, especially a sitcom, is shot on a Friday because they rehearse the whole week and then they shoot it on a Friday. So we had to say no to a lot of projects because Inside MMA was so dear to my heart. Now with that show now being canceled, now it opens up more for me. So when pilot season comes around, I'm going to start do more auditions, and then hopefully I can pick something up along the line.
That's awesome. Just before we sort of talk about Inside MMA, I'm just wondering, are there any crazy roles that you've turned down? Like any roles that you sort of look at and think like, you guys may not know this, but I was actually offered the part for, such and such movie or TV show?
No, I just had one time that they offered me a role, and it was a lead, and it came from a big company and everything, and I started reading the script, and it was really cool. And then it started taking really weird turns, like things that could not impossibly happen. Like I would be in prison, and in prison we were making, I don't even know the different names, I'm just going to throw it out there. They were making dildos, I don't know what the name for is, electric ones. And from one of those dildos, I made a hole in the front, I put a pin in, and then I put in a lock, and I turned on the dildo, and then the lock would open, And I was in a fight with a guy, and he threw a 45-pound weight plate at me in the prison's gym. I would duck, and that plate decapitated somebody else behind me. And things like that started popping up, and they kept coming, and it was like 12 in a row. Then I go, because the first time you think, I probably can talk him into something else. And then, but once it keeps on coming back, then I go, I'm sorry, I declined. I said, no, I would not like to do a movie. I think it's going to be very hard to shoot those kind of scenes. It's just not believable. The same when I hit with a broomstick somebody's head off. At that moment, the whole movie doesn't really, it's not really real anymore, because you cannot do that. It's impossible. So yeah, that was the only time that I said, okay, no. And I after I did it one time in a really bad audition, this was the most horrible thing for me. It was one of my favorite shows was for Castle, and I loved that show, Castle. And they called me. We had a party the day before, so I was really hungover, and I went over to the studios, the Inside MMA studio. I had to shoot some promos, but the promos were just audio. So I'm sitting there, and I'm doing the audio promos, and they all go really well. So I'm feeling good. And right away the telephone goes, say, hey, there's an audition. I said, when is it? Well, you're going to have to go straight to the audition room. So they sent me the script. I'm on my phone trying to memorize that script with the hangover. That was a big lesson I learned at that moment, that to never do that again. Because, that audition, that I really sucked in that audition. And, preparation is the key to everything. For instance, when I played Nico, which is, is kind of boss, but then with 20 cups of coffee, I had that script way before. So I could play it 5 different ways. If I would do a scene, I can do it like this or like this or like this, and then it would say, oh, do it like that. So that's what I like to do. I don't even need the script anymore, because I've been rehearsing for 6 weeks. I know it, and I know there's rewrites all the time, but that's easy. These are little rewrites you can do. But that preparation is the key to success. I always did that. The one time I didn't do it, I missed a part. It was not a big part, but it was one of my favorite shows. I would have loved to do that.
Well, you touched on the last episode of Inside MMA. We wanted to have a chat with you about that. It was earlier this month. It was a program that MMA fans loved, and more importantly, a chance for them to see you break down this crazy world of MMA on a weekly basis. Have to find out from you, Bas. What was it like doing the final episode after being on air for 9 years, 10 seasons, or 433 episodes?
It was eerie. It was weird, because you're leaving a family. You've been 9 years every week. I mean, I saw all these people there as a family. I see them way more than I see my own family in Holland, because every week you come back and you see them, and you form a friendship, and those kind of things. Those were hard, but it's life. Things doors close, doors open, and if it's time to stop, then. Then we keep on going. It was a shame. I just found out 2 weeks before, so I would have a little bit more heads up, so I can only start jumping into other. But again, it's what life is all about. It's finding this really fun thing that I want to do next. I'm looking in a whole bunch of things. One of them is speaking at schools. Kids against bullying. I kind of start focusing on that a little bit. I actually have a talk right after this interview with somebody who represents speakers, and they actually contacted me, so that was a good thing already. And I was busy. I did that, maybe I said it on the show a few times. I do it for 3 years in a row. I've been doing it now for a high school, for these kids, these 500 kids who leave high school and then either all go to college or they go work. And, then I talk about my life. It starts with a video of what I have done that makes sure that nobody's going to interrupt me after they show that video, and but then it breaks the ice, so to say. There's funny moments, the food fight scene I had in there from Here Comes the Boom. So people start laughing. They realize you're not a real badass. You're a badass, but you're a good guy. And then, you start connecting to the kids. And then you start, this is what I learned in life. This is how I dealt with it. And then I do all the things that happened in my life. I bring it back to this life because everything is the same. It's just different now. But the same problems exist. And the way you deal with those kind of things, that's what it's all about. Just because somebody's opinion is that you're fat or you're ugly or whatever it is, it's somebody's opinion. I'll tell them, I say, if somebody says to me, you look crazy. I say, what's your favorite color? That's my answer. And then they go like brown. And I go blue. Mine is blue. I say, you should change yours to blue. Why would I change it to blue? I said, no, blue is a way better color than brown is. And they go, dude, that makes absolutely no sense. I said, exactly, because it's just an opinion. So why would people hang on to the opinions of these losers with no IQs? They're proven to have lower IQs because otherwise they wouldn't do it. Nobody knows. Nobody really thinks it's tough. If you think it's tough to assault a kid who has there's something wrong with the kid, or maybe he's smarter than you, and you assault that kid with a group of your friends, a weaker kid than you, and you do that with a bunch of guys, and you think that is cool, something is wrong in the head with you, because that's the being the ultimate loser. That's what that is all about. And once you start talking to kids like that, and then I start picking out bullies. I'm not going to point out because I don't know who the bullies are, but I start doing the things like, I always use this example. That's what I said with cheating in mixed martial arts, in any sport, with steroids, all that stuff. If you brush your teeth at night and you look at yourself in the mirror, do you see a real tough guy there? Or do you see a guy who cheated, who did this, who did that? Now, with that saying, just saying, I know that night, if they listen to me and they brush their teeth and the bully looks himself in the mirror, he will start thinking, he goes, am I really a tough guy or not? Because, that's kind of weird, I invented this whole fake Twitter account, and then I start tagging people. Why won't I do it in their face? Or when he did it in their faces, why do I need my friends around? Why does it make me feel good to back down on a little person? And then they start realizing, wait a minute, the problem is with me. So it's good for the kids that get bullied, but it's also good for the bullies. Hopefully it opens their eyes that it's the opposite of being a tough guy. If you're a tough guy, come to my gym, I always say. You want to beat up somebody? Show you're a real tough guy, because you can make a lot of money with it nowadays.
This is why you are the perfect guy for the job, and I'm jealous of these lucky kids, because when Dennis and I were in high school, we always had really crappy speakers. Now, in 2016, people get Bas Rutten coming to their school, so lucky them. Now, seeing as obviously Inside MMA is no longer Bas, we still want to get your thoughts on what's happening in the world of MMA, so we've got some things that we want to pick your brain about. Before we sort of talk about UFC 205, which is the big one, we just got to get your thoughts on these problematic negotiations between GSP and the UFC. Before his return, almost looks certain as if UFC 206 is going to be where GSP was going to be fighting. Now it's up in the air. What have you thought about how the UFC have handled the situation with the GSP? Are you a bit surprised that he probably won't be fighting in the UFC anymore?
Well, he will fight. It's a money thing. He's a Rousey, he has McGregor, he has millions. And if he wants to make a comeback, this is the right time to make a comeback, since he's a really beloved fighter. Everybody wants to see him. But of course, he's got new demands. He's going to go like, I'm not going to fight for what you guys paid me at that time. Right now, you guys just sold for $4.2 billion or whatever it was, more than $4 billion. I know there is money, and everybody wants a piece of it. You see all the other fighters start doing it. So, that's what I think happened. And he's trying, to shoot for a high number. And I think the UFC should, let him fight. And it will happen. I truly believe so, because they're going to need a star. Because McGregor, the rumors now are very almost certain that he's going to take a year off. Ronda Rousey, well, we're going to have to see how she makes a return. I think she will do great. But what if she loses? Well, you're going to lose that. You lose two of the biggest drawers for the UFC. So then a guy like GSP will automatically fit in really nice for them. So eventually it will happen, I guess. But right now, I think it's a power move, to say no. We don't do it. It's like McGregor at the time when he didn't show up. They put their foot down and they said, no, you're off the card. And sometimes you have to do it like that, because otherwise you give him too much lenience, and then, negotiations will never be in your favor. So, but eventually, with this happening, what's going to happen with McGregor and Rousey, and Rousey, don't get me wrong, even if she wins, I don't know how long she still will be fighting. if there will be another fight after that. We're going to have to find that out. But losing McGregor by itself is already a big thing, you know. And Rousey, hopefully, she wins this fight because she's the huge draw.
Well, it seems like Michael Bisping and GSP have sort of verbally agreed to fighting each other. Dana White, of course, came out and said the fight won't be happening at UFC 206. But what do you think of this Bisping GSP matchup? Does that make sense to you? And do you think there's a chance we might actually see it happen?
Well, Michael also knows there is money to be made, and he knows that he fights against Georges St-Pierre. There's going to be a great pay-per-view buy, and being the champion and all now, he's got a cut of that pay-per-view buy, so he's going to make a lot of money, you know. And he's at the end of his career. I mean, he had a lot of injuries over the last few years, you know. So a big money fight for him would make totally sense, you know. When I read the internet, and some people are saying, oh, he just does that because he's looking for easier fights, and I go, oh, easy fight? Georges St-Pierre is not going to be an easy fight. Yeah, but he's not been fighting for a while. That's why it's going to be easier. Trust me, man. This guy had kept on training. You know, if you have the right state of mind, there should never be ring rust or cage rust, whatever you want to call it in MMA. There should never be that. I didn't have it after 7 years. It's just the way you spar and the way you go to a fight. So, no, that's not. He just looks for a payday, which I, think is a very smart thing to do for him.
Now, Bas, last time we had you on the show, we spoke about Conor McGregor and what will potentially be next for him. We were talking about the possibilities of him fighting Eddie Alvarez. You said you wanted to see him fight Aldo next, and that's the right thing to do. And if it didn't happen, then the fans would speak out their mind. If he obviously ended up fighting Alvarez, it is Alvarez now at UFC 205. What are your thoughts on the matchup now? Do you still feel like this was the wrong move by the UFC?
Well, it's the wrong move, but again, it's a money fight. First of all, McGregor wants that fight. He wants to be the first guy, next to Couture, who holds 2 belts in 2 different weight classes, right? And if he gives up, vacates now the 145 belt, then that won't happen. So that belt will be free after 205, and then he can decide what he does. Now, he's going to take a year off, but if he comes back, I don't see him fighting at 145 anymore. He was always, he's a tall guy. It's very hard for him to make 145. I think he does much better at 155. He will be stronger at that weight. But still, Eddie Alvarez, it's a real tough guy. I mean, we know what he can do. This is a guy who brings constant pressure. And we saw with McGregor the first time when he fought Diaz, that constant pressure didn't work out well for him. He started having stamina problems. In the second fight, there was a moment, I believe it was in the 3rd round, when Diaz, I believe if Diaz would have pushed at that moment, he might have taken that fight. But he didn't, allowed McGregor to get a second wind. And then McGregor came back and he won the fight. He clearly won the fight. I don't think it was that Diaz won. I thought he really won that fight. So Eddie Alvarez knows this. And stamina is not a thing that you can build in 6 months, because stamina doesn't have anything to do. Of course, it has to do with running hills and doing crazy stuff for stamina, but a lot of it is in your head. And once you start doubting yourself in the head, I might have said it on the last show as well, if he gets tired and he starts thinking about the last 2 times that he got tired, and especially the first time because that's where he lost, then you start breathing different. You start trying to cover up. You start, you don't want to show your opponent you're tired, so now you don't breathe through your mouth anymore. You start breathing through your nose, but your breathing pattern gets interrupted, and that's going to make you more tired. You simply have to breathe in and out. I said it last week on an interview with me. They said, "Oh, I heard Bas breathing heavy, and I thought he was done." That I did that when I did track and field. My dad always told me, "Don't try to camouflage if you're tired. Just breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, because if you do that, you can keep on going. If you try to fix it, to focus on the breathing, that's when you're going to have stamina problems." And I always took that to the heart. And that's why I had some guys say, "Well, he was getting tired." Well, I still knocked you out when I was getting tired. What you said, right? I mean, I wasn't tired at all. I was just taking my breath. And but there's a lot of game playing in the head. The little voice, the bad voice, and the good voice, I always say. And if McGregor needs to stay away from the bad voice, then once he gets tired, that he can still pull it off. He should think about the last fight in where he had the second wind. Move around, walk away from the fight. Literally, he did that. Take a breath and then come back. It's not like I'm running away from you. That was perfect. He should always do that. Alvarez is not going to give him that space. He will be a guy like Rafael dos Anjos. He will be on you nonstop. And he knows that it's going to be his game plan because that's the way to get McGregor tired. And once a fighter is tired, you can be any fighter on the planet, well, you're probably going to lose.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like you might be favoring Alvarez over McGregor. Am I correct in this? Are you picking Alvarez in this one, Bas?
I think if the first two and a half rounds, if there will be a knockout, I think it's probably coming from McGregor that he wins by knockout. I'm afraid when he goes into the championship rounds, and Alvarez has been there a bunch of times, and he pushes it, that could be trouble for Conor.
So, yeah, Bas, last time we were on the program, we were talking about how McGregor was going to be fighting Aldo and how that's the fight that should happen, and this Alvarez fight shouldn't come together. And then McGregor wanted the Alvarez fight to come together, so it did. Now we're talking about the fact that he's going to be giving up one of the belts. And even though during an interview with Sports Illustrated, he admitted to thinking about giving up one of the belts after sort of spending some time with it backstage, in the press conference, it almost seemed like he was sort of second-guessing the fact that he was going to give back one of the belts. How much power do you think the UFC have to actually force him give up one of the titles if he does win at UFC 205? And how much pull do you think Conor McGregor has where he could say, you know what, I've changed my mind, I want to keep both titles and there's nothing he can do about it?
Oh, I don't know what the contract says about that, but I'm pretty sure that if he right away would defend the title, but he says he's going to be a year off, but if he right away defends the title at 145, then that could be a reason to let him keep it. But then again, he's going to hold to 155. That's the problem with having two belts. I think the UFC should have the power to just say, no, the belt's going to be taken away from you. I mean, they did it with me and Pancras a while ago because I couldn't make it because I chose to stay with my family because my daughter was being born and there were big complications. I could have lost my wife and my daughter. So I said, I'm not going to fight. They said, okay, well, then we got to take the belt back. I said, oh, yeah, whatever. I'll get it back anyway when I come back.
Yeah, that's an interesting sort of thing that's going to happen, and it remains to be seen. Bas, before we let you go, just quickly, you are actually going to be part of the World Series of Fighting Madison Square Garden New Year's Eve show. This is a massive, massive show for World Series of Fighting. For fans who don't know, there are 4 titles on the line. What are some of the fights that you're looking forward to the most?
Well, main event, of course, Justin Gaethje against Severino. That's going to be a great fight. I see Gaethje winning this because right now he just seems unstoppable. I always tell him, even when I see him, I say, you can even hold back a little bit. You don't have to load up your punches. He's so powerful. Great low kicks, great strikes, great knees, great wrestling. I mean, this guy can take you down and just ground and pound you into a pulp. So he's dangerous everywhere. Always action. 16-0, only 2 decisions. I mean, come on, this is a great guy. Marlon Moraes versus Silva. That's going to be a really great fight as well. I think Silva, from his 25 wins, I believe it was 15. We talked about it yesterday. 15 wins by knockout and a bunch of submission victories. This is definitely going to be the toughest test for Marlon Moraes, who was also on like a 10 or 12 fight winning streak. And Silva is, I believe, even on a longer winning streak. So that's going to be a high-paced fight. Moraes, I always talk about his footwork, not like Dominic Cruz, but he's, if he fights a wrestler, he doesn't even have to stop him with his hands. He just moves out of the way. It's amazing what kind of footwork he has and what from different angles he attacks. So I always love to see him fight. David Branch, against Taylor, that's going to be good. Branch really found himself the last few years. In the beginning, it was a guy who always went to a decision, but now he starts stopping people because he said, you know what, if I'm going to get knocked out, so be it. I was too careful all the time. And now when he does that, he really showcases his skills, and he started stopping people. So those fights I'm really looking forward. Of course, it's a very interesting fight between Shields and Fitch. You know what's going to happen there. I think Fitch, if he's smart, he's going to keep it on his feet because he's the better striker. And Shields, well, he's going to need it on the ground. But with John Fitch being the wrestler, can he take it to the ground? Then again, he took Dan Henderson down when Dan Henderson got tired at Strikeforce. So there's always that possibility.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. And like you mentioned, it sort of reminds you of back in the Japanese days with the big New Year's Eve shows everybody could get excited about. We know we're out of time, Bas, but just quickly, a lot of people are talking about whether Justin Gaethje will test free agency and go to the UFC or somewhere else after this fight in December. Do you think he'll re-sign with World Series of Fighting?
I hope he does. I can't look inside his head. I really hope he does. I think, if they gave him a good pay and he feels good, he should stay in the World Series of Fighting. But then, I'm a little biased, of course, because I would love to commentate on him since he's just a pleasure to see. This guy, like I said, there's somebody's going to get knocked out or you see action, but it's always action. So for him, money-wise, I don't know. Maybe he's going to say, yeah, I'm going to test free market. Maybe there's even more money at Bellator at that time for him, maybe with the sponsoring. I don't know. But I think that policy probably is going to change with the Reebok deal. I heard it's going to end in 2017. I don't know the specifics of it. But, they need to do something there for the fighters. I do believe that.
Mm-hmm. Well, there you guys go. Bas Rutten, thank you for coming onto the program. You can download The River Thief now via iTunes and other VOD providers. Also, make sure to check out the O2 Trainer to improve your lung function and get into summer shape. You think maybe Conor McGregor might need an O2 Trainer, Bas, to get ready for this fight with Eddie Alvarez, UFC 205. It could be a secret weapon. You can also find out more information about that at o2trainer.com. Make sure to jump on there and get yours today. And listen to Bas every week on his podcast, Rutten and Ronaldo, which is available on Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, SoundCloud. And make sure to follow Bas on Twitter at Bas Rutten MMA. Bas, thanks so much for being on the program.
You're very welcome, guys. Well, I just went through the emails. Do you realize we sent back and forth 72 emails in the course of the time that we know each other? So that's funny, right?
Wow.
That's right. Well, 72 more emails, and every email for us has been a pleasure, even when you just send us a question mark. It's really honor writing to you.
Awesome, man. We'll let you go. Talk soon. Bye.
Hey guys, it's Stipe Miocic, UFC heavyweight champion, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
All right, guys, our next guest does an incredible job of covering and keeping the MMA community up to date on the latest in Russian and Eastern European MMA. We love having him on and listening to his insight and amazing stories about his own experiences. He's an editor for BloodyElbow.com and a columnist for Sports on Earth. Karim Zidan, welcome back to Submission Radio. It's been ages, and we've missed you, man.
Well, you know what? It has been too long, and I keep thinking all the time, when am I going to be back on Submission Radio again? And, it's great to be back on, and it's always good to talk to you guys. So, yeah, let's see what you guys want to start with here. There's a lot of crazy things to talk about that's been happening lately in just the Russian MMA landscape.
Yeah, this is why we've brought you on, man. You are officially the expert. So there's a lot to talk about. Let's start talking about one of the major things we want to get your insight on. A few weeks ago, Chechnya's strongman leader Ramzan Kadyrov held an MMA event which featured 3 of his sons fighting on the card. Their ages range between 8 and 11 years old. The fact that his children this young were fighting sparked a huge amount of controversy and criticism pretty much all around the world, not just in Russia, including from the legendary Fedor Emelianenko. Before we get into the whole aftermath with Fedor, what did you make of the situation of the kids fighting at this event, Karim?
Well, I first got light of this basically the day before the event happened, when Ahmed MMA, basically Kadyrov's promotion, started promoting the fights on social media, and then suddenly there was a video that had gone up of the weigh-ins. And during the weigh-ins, they specifically had a video of his middle child, Adam, who is about 9 years old. And in that video, Adam goes up onto the gold scale. Yes, Chechnya does have a gold scale that these fighters weigh on.
Is it made out of gold, or is it just gold in color?
Oh, it is made out of gold, like solid gold.
Then everybody would be overweight, right? Everybody would weigh like 300 kilos.
I have no idea. Well, I'm not quite sure if it's the top part of it that's gold. However it works. The point is that's one of the things they promoted when they first got, is they talked about, look at us, we're so special, we've got this gold scale. But anyway, that's against the point here. So he stands there and he's showing off, and he's putting on all the theatrics that a fighter would ahead of like trying to promote sort of a UFC main event or something. And he's really into this little 8-year-old, 9-year-old kid. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what did they have to do to get him to be this aggressive, this young, and this early, basically? Like, how did they convince him into this? And the whole scene just seemed so bizarre to me that I was like, well, they can't really pull this off. This must be an exhibition fight. So I decided, all I did was post a video and made light of the fact that, this fight might possibly happen. But I didn't specify that it was going to be an actual MMA fight, because even I wasn't convinced that Chechnya's strongman leader, for all his bizarre megalomaniac antics, I wasn't convinced he'd put his own children in actual MMA fights. And boy, was I wrong. So the following day on the Ahmed card, in 3 featured bouts of the evening, so all on the main card, some of those fights actually took place after Magomed Biblitov, World Series of Fighting's flyweight champion's own title fight on the Ahmed card. So that fight happened. After that, you've got a co-main event with Adam Kadyrov against a poor 9 9-year-old Ossetin kid. And honestly, that kid looked terrified, absolutely terrified to be there. And just got, like, there was no protective gear whatsoever on them. They wore gloves the size of a regular fighter's gloves in MMA. There was no headgear. There was no sort of protective padding whatsoever on them. And it was 3 5-minute rounds. It was craziness. I couldn't understand what I was watching. It did not look like an exhibition fight. They certainly looked like they were swinging and kicking. And what was really interesting was that Kadyrov's children looked well trained. For children, they looked very well trained. There are adults who throw worse punches than those kids did. And that is a terrifying thing to think about. So the whole scene was bizarre, and it did not take long for the Russian media community, which is, interestingly enough, they keep quiet about a great many things. And articles went up very, very quickly. And we're talking mainstream Russian media. So not necessarily sports sites, but really important state-owned websites like TASS.ru, Alenta.ru, all these specifically politics-based websites started publishing these articles about how Kadyrov, Chechnya's strongman dictator leader, is hosting children fights for entertainment purposes, basically. And all these articles had a negative tone, which I found really interesting. It was something you don't really expect generally when it comes to Kadyrov. Kadyrov, you get articles about him, and it's usually, oh, look at the ridiculous thing he's doing. But this sort of condemnation was really rare. And it was only shortly thereafter, of course, that Fedor Emelianenko himself spoke out. And when he spoke out is when things really started to like, that's what really got the ball rolling, basically. It was his comments that got the attention of the Kremlin. So the actual Russian government got involved as soon as Fedor put those comments out, because he spoke on behalf of the Russian MMA Union, which is certified by the Russian government themselves, operates within the boundaries of the government, etc. So Fedor, being the president of that association, once he puts out such a powerful statement condemning the fight, which, mind you, has since been deleted, but we'll get into that later, it's definitely shook the community. The Chechens themselves were so shocked and rattled by the fact that Fedor himself would actually come out against the event that they immediately started targeting him with all sorts of harassment and intimidation and humiliation tactics that I just thought were disgusting. They'd specifically post a lot of pictures of him after the Fabio Maldonado fight. So a lot of those pictures with his swollen face and swollen head went up. People talking about why, if you can't even protect yourself, why are you trying to speak out in the protection of everyone else? And all sorts of really, really horrible comments. Why don't you go look after your rapist brother? Stuff like that. So there was a lot of that. And this wasn't coming from random fans, because if we're talking about trolls or just hate in general coming from fans, well, I mean, everybody gets that to a certain extent, especially after controversial statements. But what Fedor got was from State Duma members, so parliamentarians basically. He got these sort of comments from fighters, notable fighters. So Magomed Biblatov himself, the World Series of Fighting flyweight champion, was one of the people who put out all the statements. UFC fighter Abdikarim Edilov was another one who put out a lot of statements. And mind you, Edilov himself was the person who trained Kadyrov's children. So a UFC fighter signed and contracted to fight in the UFC, even though he's suspended right now for Meldonia, is the same person who trained these children to compete in illegal fights. So that's something that should be noted as well, that the UFC is employing some people who've committed some really heinous acts, as far as I'm concerned. And more people who came out and condemned Fedor were people like Khabib Nurmagomedov, a person who's supposedly supposed to be the #1 contender in the lightweight division, and former heavyweight champion Fabricio Verdum. So the list goes on for the people who have associated with Kadyrov and chose to side with him over Fedor, even though the Russian MMA union's rules specifically state that no child below the age of 12 can ever compete in mixed martial arts, and between the age of 12 and 18, they must wear both headgear and a lot of protective gear. The round system is structured differently. It has to be certified and regulated by the union, which it wasn't done at all in Kadyrov's case. So there was really no reason to defend the event. Yet a lot of people immediately lashed out against Fedor. And That obviously led to a whole other series of events afterwards. But it was very disappointing to see immediately the schism this created in the Russian MMA community, because you could immediately see it devolving to an argument between the North Caucasus, being Dagestan, Chechnya, and Muslim Russians, against the Orthodox Slavic Russians that backed Fedor. And you could see it from the fighters who backed Fedor versus the people who backed Kadyrov. So it seemed like this sort of incident was going to be the dividing line in Russian MMA, which would have taken the sport back many years in Russia, especially since it got legalized in 2012. It would have taken the sport back many, many years, just because of Kadyrov's antics and because someone as big and as polarizing as Fedor came out against him, basically. So the whole situation really reached a boiling point. And then a few days later, after a lot of people threatened Fedor on Instagram, Kadyrov decides to come out and say, you know what? I think Fedor has learned his lesson, and he probably wants to apologize anyway. So I want all you Chechens, all my fighters, all my friends and followers to take down these messages. This is not the Chechen way. So he wanted to, of course, come out as the magnanimous leader who's not affected by other people's mistakes. So all those messages have since been deleted. I've published articles that noted these Instagram posts and embedded them, and they're no longer available. So those posts that I've published there no longer have those Instagram embeds because they've all been deleted by Kadyrov's request. And ever since then, that's the point where things got really interesting, of course. Fedor's daughter was reportedly assaulted a couple of days later in Moscow. And immediately, it's very difficult to hear that happen after Fedor has been threatened by the henchman for the Chechen strongman, who's known to make people disappear, especially people he doesn't like, and known for the extreme levels of intimidation and the extent of his intimidation that he's willing to go to, murder people, and the human rights abuses that he's willing to cause. It's very easy for people to get the impression that Fedor spoke out, and then Kadyrov wanted to teach him a lesson, so he attacked Fedor's daughter. And as it stands right now, I mean, Casper, Dennis, I'm on the phone with you guys here right now, and I can tell you honestly, I do not know what happened there. I can tell you the way I believe it's laid out, and there's multiple options. And I've spoken to many people, and many people are convinced with multiple avenues that this could have gone. Many people honestly do not believe Kadyrov would have stooped so low as to actually attack Fedor's daughter. They see it as an unnecessary step and something that would have caused way too much grief for too little a reward. He believes that that's not the way that he would have intimidated Fedor, and that his game had already been played out, and there was no use taking this any further. Now, what I've heard a lot more of is one of two other options, which is indirectly one of Kadyrov's crazed supporters wanted to do good for his leader and went on his own sort of mission to find Fedor's daughter and assault her. And when we're talking about the assault of Fedor's daughter, I should mention, for those who don't know the story, Fedor's daughter was his middle daughter, 16 years old, was on her way to school in Moscow when an unidentified assailant stepped out of nowhere and basically kicked her in the chest, and she had to be hospitalized with bruising and all sorts of issues afterwards. She was hospitalized for a couple of days. So up until now, they don't know who the assailant is. And people immediately assumed that it was Kadyrov, or Kadyrov had sent someone out. Now that seems like too small for Kadyrov, someone who has been also alleged to have been involved in the murder of Putin's biggest political rival, Boris Nemtsov. For him to go from that political sort of assassination attempt, again, alleged, there is no proof that it's Ramzan Kadyrov who's behind it, but to go from that to kicking the daughter of a famous fighter seems like a step down for the dictator. And this is not to come to his defense at all, but to say that there are other avenues that seem to make more sense. And one of them is that one of his crazed supporters actually went on his own mission to do so, to strike fear into Fedor. The other alternative is that someone else would looking to continue the schism created in Russian MMA and truly segment Muslim fighters from Orthodox fighters by extending this problem. But that's the same argument that Kadyrov went back to. when he made a statement saying we would never and no Chechen would ever attack Fedor's daughter, he immediately said that somebody is trying to provoke the situation. Now that seems like an easy ploy, an easy excuse and an easy way out, but all it did was convolute the situation a lot more. Fedor's daughter has already given a statement to the police saying that the assailant looked to be of Slavic origin. Now, what that statement's supposed to mean is that the person does not look like your average fighter from the North Caucasus. He doesn't look like a Khabib Nurmagomedov, basically. So that Slavic feature is what you think of the old traditional Russian feature. But you know, when you really think about it, and as someone personally who knows a lot of Chechens, and I've met a lot of them, and I've seen a lot of them in Russia, some of them look as European as it gets. We're talking red hair, blonde hair, blue eyes. How are you really supposed to differentiate on a camera, a pixelated camera on a screen, and a half-identified person? How are you really going to know truly where they're from? So the whole situation is really bizarre, and it never played out fully, but as it seems right now, it has fizzled down. Fedor hasn't made any statements. Apparently, he's back in training for a potential fight, but as it stands right now, Kadyrov's already moved on to a whole different political game, and he happens to have a reality TV show now. So it's a whole bizarre situation. Yep.
Maybe the attacker will be featured on the reality show. Makes a cameo. Yeah. Hey, it's Jim. There you go.
The big reveal. He's like the Kardashians of Russia.
He really is. Only people lose their lives trying to talk about him. You don't see people reporting on the Kardashians and the Kardashians putting out hits on them, but it's a whole different ball game with Kadyrov, sadly.
Yeah, there's a new season coming out on E soon, so who knows what that season's going to bring, but not yet. Let's quickly talk about this. While you're talking about this whole Fedor thing, I just have a couple of questions. I mean, so much to digest, and thank you so much, Karim, for all that. I mean, so much going on over there. When people think of Fedor, they think of a man who's powerful in politics over in Russia, respected man. Why do you think he deleted the comment from social media? Do you actually think there was fear on his end of potential repercussions as to what happened to his daughter, or do you think politically someone sort of made him take it down because it was further causing a rift between Orthodox and Muslim Russians?
Well, I think that's a very good question, to be honest, because I've had a lot of people send me odd tweets where I think they really are misguided in terms of what they understand about Fedor and his relationship with Vladimir Putin. And I tried, when I put up my feature about it a few weeks ago, to really explain the difference between Putin's alliance with Kadyrov versus his with Fedor. Now, people sent me messages saying, well, Fedor is best friends with Putin, or he's really good friends with Putin. Now, I need to say this right now. None of that is true. Absolutely none of that is true. They do not maintain a real friendship. That does not happen. It's just not the way it operates. Fedor was elevated into the political elite because of his status as an athlete. I have done many articles discussing the importance of sports diplomacy in a place like the Russian Federation. And an icon like Fedor Emelianenko, particularly a Slavic, believing Orthodox Russian combat sports fighter, it was basically the perfect package for Putin. So Putin elevated him into the political elite by giving him higher status, better paying jobs, and also a whole life outside of fighting in exchange for political favors, being what? Fedor, in Putin's last election, campaigned for him. And that was extremely effective, because this was around the time where Putin's popularity was dipping because of issues like the annexation of Crimea and a multitude of other issues, including a recession that was ongoing. So there were various reasons why not to like Putin, and using the influence of a fighter like Fedor was exceptionally important. And he did this with a variety of other people. Like, you think of famous Russian wrestlers like Alexander Karl, and all these different people ended up in the State Duma and Parliament. Fedor is sort of on that same trajectory where if he wants to enter politics, he can most certainly enter politics. Now, to answer your question about whether he was intimidated or not, I think the truth is he was probably told, the best thing you can do right now, your message has been received, all the outlets have already reported it, there is no point keeping your message up to continue this feud. I believe he also realized his position amongst in the hierarchy next to Putin. We're talking about a fighter at the end of the day up against a strongman leader in Chechnya who has leverage over the Kremlin because of how volatile Chechnya is as a republic, Putin needs Kadyrov more than he needs Fedor. And Fedor realized that very quickly during this situation. Yes, the Kremlin did speak out and did condemn the child MMA fights, but when it came down to actually reviewing it and sending out punishment, all they did was send Ahmed MMA, Kadyrov's promotion, a sternly worded letter. That was it. That was the extent of it. No mention of the assault. No one seems to be looking into it much anymore. It's all been hush-hush. So honestly, it seems like the Kremlin is trying to do damage control to silence the situation right now, just to end it. Because they know Fedor is the sort of person that it's easy for, if something happens to him, there's a lot of people who back him immediately because he's so beloved amongst your average Russian because of the morals he stands by, not just his professional career, because he's so orthodox, because he's so modest. A huge segment of the Russian people really admire that about him. So if something happens to him or issues happen to him, this is bad news for the Kremlin because it's bad publicity in the first place, because people do know that this is one of Putin's favorite athletes. Now, if you want to phrase it that way, a favorite athlete, that makes a lot more sense to me than framing it like friends. If anyone understands Putin in politics and the way he handles things, I don't think friendship factors in much at all when it comes to his idea of where an athlete stands. Now, it's very different if you're one of Putin's friends and one of his judo teammates from back in the day. A couple of those people now actually run the Judo Federation in Russia and are both oligarchs. So they're billionaires based on the fact that they can get state contracts to do all sorts of infrastructure work in Russia, and they get them from who? Putin. Now, that's very different because those are people that Putin can have as truly be loyal to him, and he can reap long-term benefits from. What can he truly reap from Fedor, apart from those small political favors like helping him in re-election campaigns, etc.? And he won't use him twice. So he's done his part now, and he's elevated Fedor. Fedor knows now that he has to maintain his position amongst that elite. How does he do so? Well, the truth is, fighting Kadyrov is definitely not one way to do it.
That is a great way of looking at it, Karim, and I'm glad you sort of explained that. Dennis and myself, a lot of time we sort of suspect that our friendship with Putin may just be him using us for our political insight into the Australian world. But in all seriousness, you mentioned the letter that the Kremlin sent out. And obviously them ruling against child fights and looking to prevent them from happening in the future. Interesting thing is Fedor wasn't actually at that meeting, even though members of the Russian MMA Union were present. Do you think this is the end of this chapter? And, would Kadyrov actually follow the Kremlin's orders and not do any more child fights? Or do you think he would just ignore it and keep doing it?
I truly believe that this whole incident was bad publicity for everyone involved. The truth is, no one came out of this looking perfect. No one at all. Fedor made new enemies. Kadyrov embarrassed his republic because at the end of the day, he did not get the approval of the Kremlin and they ruled against him. So headlines in Russia were Kremlin rules against Kadyrov. That does not look good on someone who's already losing slight leverage because Putin is reworking the deal between Moscow and Chechnya. Now, this is a long political discussion that I really don't think we'll have time to get into. But the truth is, where Kadyrov stood with Putin in 2008 is very different to where he stands with him in 2016. And incidents like this really are just completely unnecessary when there is so much at stake in terms of policy, actual governing policy in the country, whether or not to stand by his guns over a child MMA fight and make a big deal out of this. I truly think in terms of where Kadyrov is, this is the end of the line in that story, and he will obey in terms of having the Chechen government and the Chechen sports ministry follow the guidelines and not have kids compete before the age of 12 and with headgear on. But I would not be surprised to see him continue the strategy of using child fights, particularly his own children, because what he did with it, people didn't seem to understand why I was so upset with the concept. It's not just because they're child fights. Yes, I understand that kids are doing martial arts in taekwondo, karate, and they fight in football and in all sorts of other sports where there's also contact from a very young age, from 7 and earlier. I understand all that. But there's protective gear and there's regulations, and these are not hosted by a dictator who's using them for entertainment and propaganda purposes. What we witnessed that night was dynastic propaganda where Kadyrov showcased his own children and said, look at my bloodline. These are fit rulers. This is why the Kadyrov line is ruling Chechnya right now. That's what we witnessed. People in general in the United States might not have seen that, but in Chechnya, that's what they understood in that. And that's the message Kadyrov was trying to send. It's part of his militarization of the Chechen youth. He is creating his own personal army. He already has 30,000 Kadyrovsky as part of his personal army, legitimately outside of the control of the Kremlin. They operate and they follow the orders of only Ramzan Kadyrov. And if that is not a terrifying thought, I really don't know what is. It's terrible. It's terrible in all ways involved. Combat sports, for so long, we've seen corruption involved in it between gangsters trying to work their way in, money laundering issues, dictators being involved to distract from human rights abuses, as we're still seeing to this day in places like Bahrain, where they have MMA events and the Formula One race, and at the same time are still locking people up for media censorship and all sorts of different reasons, just because journalists are being journalists and actually reporting the news, and just because others are trying to step up and say, you know what, we don't like what is going on. They will use athletes. There are athletes right now in Bahrain, jiu-jitsu fighters, and all sorts of different other MMA fighters that are in jail right now because they were on the wrong side at the wrong time. And we're going to continue to see this in combat sports as long as fans are willing to watch it just because it is still MMA. If it's still MMA and you're just looking to watch a fight for a fight, at least think about who you're supporting and who is dying because of what you are ignorantly allowing onto your TV screen.
It's a crazy story, and definitely something that everybody needs to focus on. And it's great that you're bringing light to this, Karim. Finally, while we're talking about Kadyrov, it seemed like an alleged assassination attempt on his life. As we finish up on this topic, do you know exactly what happened here, or can you tell us anything about this?
All I know is actually this incident apparently occurred a few months ago, and it was on it's very difficult to know the actual details because Chechnya is controlling the information that's coming out. And I don't want to speak out of turn with political things that I truly don't understand very well, but from the conversations I had, Kadyrov is trying to deny, as a matter of fact, that there was an attempt on his life several months ago when several militants were captured on the way into Grozny, carrying basically weaponry and aiming to come to the palace after him. Whether this was a serious attempt or not, or whether this was the case, or what he was trying to prove through leaking this information at this certain point, it's very difficult to tell because, again, he plays so many, not necessarily mind games, but everything is part of the chess game overall. All the leaked information, anything you've seen coming out of Chechnya is trying to either benefit him or attack someone from his neighboring republic or send a message to the Kremlin. So that's what we're getting through this. At the end of the day, if we have to be honest, there's probably been many attempts on Kadyrov's life over the years. Many attempts, as any leader would probably face. And in such a region that's volatile like Chechnya, I mean, just the clan wars that took place during the First and Chechen War, for us to even get to the Kadyrov line running Chechnya, there was a lot of death that came up towards that stage. A lot of death. So there's a lot of people out there probably who still don't like Kadyrov. A lot of people who are all over the world, which is why you hear of Chechens dying in places like Dubai, in assassinations, etc., because he has a lot of enemies around the world, and he's still going after them just to secure his spot. As far as Moscow is concerned, I think they want Kadyrov around in Chechnya for a while, which is why I'm not surprised he's grooming his children the way he is. Again, it's all involved. MMA is not just escapism. It is really and legitimately being used as a tool, as a political tool to influence and shape policy and government.
Wow. Before we let you go, Karim, obviously we've only got a few minutes left before we have to let you go, but we just wanted to sort of get an update. What can you tell us about Fedor Emelianenko's latest fight rumors? And let me add to that, he did say in a recent interview that he's, in negotiations with promotions such as Rise and EFN and the UFC. Do you know if there are actually even any UFC negotiations taking place? And with the new owners and drastic staff cuts, is it even remotely likely that Fedor would somehow end up in the UFC, or is this just another tease as per usual?
I'll try and take it in the order that you asked those questions. So as far as the updates, yes, he is back in training. He's in Stario Skol, but his coach was actually hospitalized recently, and I'm not sure he's gotten back in the gym yet. So there was a bit of a shake-up in the gym, and especially over the past few weeks with all the stuff that was going on with his daughter, etc. He was moving back and forth, and I know he had duties as the president of the Russian MMA Union over the past few weeks, delivering all sorts of awards and attending certain events in St. Petersburg last week. So I'm pretty sure he only just resumed training this week. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. In terms of potential fights, from what I heard, the Shane Carwin fight is not on the table. I'm not sure if that's already become news or not. I haven't checked, to be honest. But as far as I've been told, the Shane Carwin fight was offered to Fedor. He considered it an interesting fight, but in the end believed he wasn't going to be trained enough or ready enough to take it. And I'm not sure why his actual reason for rejecting the fight was, but that's what I heard from my source, and that Fedor ultimately put the contract aside and said that this is not the fight for him. I've also heard that he's not doing his negotiations aren't going very well with Rizin in particular. I haven't heard anything about Bellator, but I know that Rizin in particular is not interested in paying his fee again, and they're still upset about him deciding to work with multiple promotions instead of maintain sort of that special bond that could have been sparked with Rizin, and that he returned to Russia afterwards, which Saki Kabara apparently did not expect him to do. So that sort of affected their negotiations from then onwards. And in terms of the UFC, as far as I know, there is absolutely nothing to update there. No negotiations whatsoever. I do not believe he has started negotiations with the new owners. And this all could be very hush-hush at the same time, because his press team and all sorts of other people around him, the Fedor team themselves, have been silent since the Kadyrov incident. Like, even the reports that came out that he was in training came out because the reporter who said so, actually, Alexei Safarov, is actually a good friend of mine from Russia, and he was on the same flight, or in the same sort of, like, they were transiting around the same time. He saw Fedor there, and that's how they sort of had that conversation, and he got the update from Fedor. But in general, Fedor's team has been really, really silent these days, so it's very difficult to tell exactly what they're doing.
Wow, so much stuff going on, Karim. Thank you so much for joining us today. Guys, make sure to follow Karim on Twitter @Zidan Sports. He does great coverage, obviously, of MMA. You have to make sure to keep on top of these stories. Just fantastic work. And also, great coverage of the tennis. And Karim, I don't know if you'll be down here for the Australian Open, but Andy Murray looks to be the best man in the world right now. A quick prediction. Do you think Djokovic takes the Australian Open, or is Murray going to reign next year?
Here's the thing. I think Andy Murray has gone to like 5 Australian Open finals, 5 of them, and he hasn't won the title. It's become sort of that he has to do it before he retires. So with complete bias, you can't ask me a prediction question involving Andy Murray and not expect it to be biased. Like, honestly, I mean, I'm a big Andy Murray fan, and I'm sure you know this, but I'm convinced that he has it in him, especially with the way he's playing versus the way Djokovic is playing right now. He has it in him not only to beat Djokovic. We've seen him beat Djokovic before, but to beat him at the Australian Open and win that like elusive title. I'm certain he can do it. Whether 2017 will be the year, I certainly hope so. And if that's the case, I hope I'm there with you guys enjoying it.
That's right. We'll have to give you a bit of barbecue and a couple of beers, guys. Karim Zidan, make sure to follow him. He is a treasure in the MMA community. I mean, just the work that you do just while you're on the program, we just want to commend you. It's a fantastic job, and we can't wait to see what happens next, guys. Make sure to follow him, and no doubt about it, we'll have him back on the show soon with more updates. Karim, thank you so much for your time. Guys, we'll be right back. More Submission Radio right after this.
This is Don Fry, and you're listening to Submission Radio. You touch that dial and I'll kill you.
All right, guys, joining us here for the first time is a close friend of Submission Radio. He's the co-host of Extra Rounds podcast, the man behind Sports Illustrated's Fansided. He also has one of the best beards in the MMA media room. That's right, guys. Our buffet buddy himself, Mike Dyce. It's a pleasure to welcome you for the first time to Submission Radio. Welcome, welcome.
Longtime fan, first time caller.
Oh man, awesome.
I'll tell you what, guys, there's a bit of stuff to talk about. No event this weekend, but a few fun little things to discuss. And I will also let all the listeners know that at the end of this discussion, possibly one of the most exciting things to happen on Submission Radio in its over 100 episode history, we'll be giving you guys our top 5 Tom Cruise movies. This is, of course, because the second Jack Reacher movie is out. Even though Mike Dyce has not seen the movie, me and Casper might give him our thoughts on that, and then we'll get into our list. Apparently, Mike has a big surprise for all of us, so everybody stay tuned to the end of the show because you don't want to miss out on this one. But let's jump to the news of UFC 206. I mean, a lot of criticism with this card, but a dynamite fight between Max Holloway and Anthony Pettis has been added to the card. Mike, do you think this warrants it being a pay-per-view, or does this card still need another headliner fight here to make it worthwhile for fans to pay their $50 or $60 to watch it?
I don't know that it needs another headliner, but it needs another big fight like this Pettis-Holloway matchup. That being said, there's still a lot of optimism from people that GSP could fight at UFC 206. I know that there's some people who've weighed in who are close to him that say it's still potentially feasible. So, let's not give up hope yet, though it looks like a long shot. But I think it still needs one big fight.
Yeah, I mean, as far as my thoughts, I definitely think this card needs something bigger. I would even go as far as to say that it does need another headliner. If you look at the card at the moment, I mean, it's not a great pay-per-view. I also think it's the fact that it's sandwiched between two really good pay-per-views in UFC 205, which is like literally the best ever, and then UFC 207, which is of course, two title fights, Ronda Rousey's coming back, Dom Cruz versus Cody Garbrandt. So it doesn't really help. But if you look at it, I mean, this is like, you've got a great main event in Daniel Cormier versus Anthony Rumble Johnson. You got the Holloway versus Pettis fight. That's going to be dynamite. And then you look around and, Cub Swanson versus Doo Ho Choi. That is going to be an amazing fight. But then it's kind of like a lot of familiar names and faces for the Canadian market, like Mitch Gagnon, Chad LaPrice. Who else have you got? Olivier Aubin-Mercier, John McDessie. These are good fighters, and there's some good fights in there, but to be honest with you, I don't really think it warrants the $50 or $60. I don't want to be sort of a downer here or anti-UFC, but it really looks like the UFC kind of left a gap, left an opening, and we're hoping to potentially either get GSP or someone in there, and I think it's still lacking. And that's not a shot against Cormier versus Rumble Johnson, because that's going to be a great fight, but when you look at the Canadian market, it hasn't been good recently. The last few cards that the UFC put on there, they haven't been great. UFC 174 was one of them. You had Demetrius Johnson headlining and Rory McDonald in the co-main event, and it just doesn't really fit the mold of the pay-per-views that the UFC have been doing recently, where they've just been, double A grade or triple A grade. So I think it needs another main event. I think it needs something potentially above Cormier and Rumble Johnson. What do you think, Dennis?
Yeah, well, I agree. And, a lot of people sort of complaining, why are people saying the DC versus Johnson isn't enough? It's a great fight, but we've already seen this fight happen before. It's taken place sort of in a strange place because it's in a Canadian market, like Casper mentioned. And even though I'm excited to watch it, there's no doubt that this is definitely lacking a big fight. And you'd be thinking right now, the UFC's probably kicking themselves for not keeping Rory McDonald around. I mean, this is a guy that they could put on these Canadian cards that enough excitement in the welterweight division right now to figure out a fun matchup for him. So it is lacking. Randa Marcos, I'm surprised she's not on the card. A lot of Canadians like to see her, on the lower end of the card. But like you mentioned, Mike, a lot of speculation about this Bisping and GSP fight. I just want to quickly go to you first. So are you still a believer in this thing? Do you still think there's a chance GSP can be on UFC 206?
I do, just because, like you guys have talking about this card, there's a bit of desperation here, right? So that works in GSP's favor because the promotion needs a star. Like if ticket sales aren't going so great or whatever, maybe they feel like they need another star and they encourage them to get. Maybe this is just jockeying like we've seen the UFC do publicly before with these kind of beefs, like the whole Khabib thing with 205.
Right, yeah.
But I've talked to some people who said that, the main hurdle in that deal is his representation. I know there's like a lot of people have thought it's the Under Armour deal or this or that, but it's been his representation, and that seems like a hurdle that can be overcome. So, maybe if GSP doesn't get put onto the card and Bisping's willing to fight, maybe something happens there. Maybe there's another champion. But it makes you wonder, they added Garbrandt Cruz to UFC 207, and it has this double bantamweight title going on at UFC 207. And I know Garbrandt wanted to fight in 207, but that was another title fight they could have thrown on this card to try and boost it too.
You said, sorry to cut in, Cass, you said representation. What exactly do you mean by that? They don't get along with his management? There's a long-standing issue with, obviously, he's represented by a big management group that they don't like to deal with. Do you know what kind of issue with this representation sort of stands in the way?
I didn't get specifics from people that I talked to, but GSP is represented by, I think it's Creative Artist Agency, it's CAA, and then WME, the group that bought the UFC, is another powerful agent group. So these are two essentially rival groups. One just happens to own the UFC, and the other one represents a marquee fighter trying to fight in the UFC. So there's that conflict of interest going on. And the people are saying that that's what played a huge part in preventing the deal from being worked out.
Yeah, that's a crazy situation. I guess if you're fans of Entourage, if the UFC is, say, the Ari Gold agency, then GSP's one would be the Terrence McEwick agency or Adam Davies agency, however you want to look at it. So, I mean, that's a bummer that's the actual hurdle there. I'm with you, Mike, though. I think that anything can sort of be worked out. Anything can be overlooked. Like you mentioned, there was the Khabib situation where a matter of days before the press conference for UFC 205, Dana White was denying that Conor McGregor was going to fight Eddie Alvarez and saying, no, it's going to be Eddie Alvarez and Khabib Nurmagomedov. And then look how that turned out. There's a long history of these kinds of things happening. And you're right, there is this big missing void. And you mentioned the desperation. I mean, even though GSP sort of said that it's not going to happen, I think that can change. I know a lot of people sort of took his appearance on the MMA Hour as if GSP is going to fight for something bigger and that he's going to sort of go out there and stand up for all the fighters and potentially wage a big war. And, you're right in a lot of ways that GSP, he could be the guy to do that. He's financially set, he has the money, and he doesn't need to fight. So if he really wanted to go into a court battle, I think he'd do it. But I think realistically, he does... he's trained. He wants to come back. I think he has the itch, and I think if they do offer him something, I think if they can sort of get over that and the money's right and they can sort of get past this whole agency ordeal, I think he'll come back. It wouldn't surprise me at all. It's still in play.
Remember when Brock Lesnar rumors were going around before UFC 200 and Dana White was telling everybody, he doesn't want to do this. His mind's not in it. If you're not in it, you can't do it. And that's the same thing he's saying with GSP, of course. Lesnar ended up fighting at 200, but it's like a standoff. It's like to go back to UFC 200. It's like the Conor McGregor press conference media obligation dispute. It's just like public jockeying to try and they're both using their audiences to try and leverage something out of the other is what it seems like.
I'm just curious, do you guys like this matchup of Bisping and GSP? We've never really spoken about this before on the show, Casper, but do you guys like the fact that Bisping may be fighting a guy that is, I suppose, a past welterweight champion? And there's probably a good opportunity that if GSP beats him, and I suppose it's a super fight, then you've got your middleweight champion losing to a guy who you don't really know what's going on with him in the welterweight division. Is that a bit weird for you guys? I mean, does this fight make sense? Mike, I want to get your thoughts.
To me, it doesn't necessarily make sense. I was told Bisping wasn't the first option when they were discussing fights with GSP. Another name was thrown out, but that person declined.
Are you at liberty to tell us who that name was, or you can't say?
Nick Diaz?
I mean, not Nick Diaz, but
Robbie Lawler?
His brother.
Oh, so potentially Nate versus GSP was sort of in the pipeline.
Right. I was hesitant to mention it because I haven't confirmed that. I just heard it from somebody who's very close.
Okay.
But, they would tell you that you need 2 sources to always confirm things. So I'll throw that caveat out there that I haven't had another source confirm that. But, he turned it down because it's Nick's fight in his eyes, supposedly. And then Bisping was the next person that they brought up. That being said, the fight, Bisping, GSP, I don't know. I've never really thought of it. It never really appealed to me. I'd almost rather still see Anderson Silva versus GSP, just because that's, in a lot of ways, it's Mayweather Pacquiao to MMA fans. That's the big super fight between two long-reigning dominant champions that people wanted to see for a long time.
I still feel like if you look at sort of best case scenario versus worst case scenario, Bisping beats GSP which is a big feat, but at the same time, he's a guy who's never fought at middleweight and has always been hesitant to fight at middleweight. So I don't know if it's as big as it's not as big an accomplishment as, say, somebody at welterweight beating GSP. And then best case scenario, you get GSP becoming the champion, which, I mean, if you're fighting the champion, it needs to be for the belt. And then what? He fights guys like Weidman or Rockhold. I don't know how well GSP would do in that division. If he did really go in and dominate that division, that would be insane. That would be one of the most amazing and miraculous career sort of resurgences ever, but I don't really see that happening. So I don't really love that matchup. But you know what's crazy? There were rumors, and take them as really nothing more than that, of potentially Nick Diaz versus Bisping. And this could just be a rumor put out there, again, like public jockeying, kind of like with Mayweather and Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz saying, oh, well, if you don't take this fight, Nate, we're going to do Mayweather versus Conor, so you better sign. But I would actually kind of prefer Nick Diaz versus Bisping, because at least Nick Diaz has fought in the division. I could see him mixing it up with some of the other middleweights. And I kind of thought about it like this. With Bisping and GSP, my biggest hang-up was you've got other contenders in the division. You've got Romero, you've got Jacare, you've got Rockhold, you've got Weidman. Why would you sort of waste this time by bringing in somebody else? But if you look at the timeline, considering that UFC 205 is where, Weidman and Romero are fighting, that's two contenders, and then Jacare and Rockhold are a few weeks later, and then UFC 206 is just a couple of weeks after that. Even if Michael Bisping does fight anybody, whether it's GSP or Nick Diaz, it's not as invasive. It doesn't get in the way of the middleweight division, because theoretically, everybody, the champion and the contenders, they're all fighting at the same time, they're all healing at the same time, and then when it's time to, move on to the next contender, they can still fight. It's not like it's a, 6 or 8 month delay between title fights. So I'm not opposed to Bisping fighting. I don't love this GSP matchup. I prefer Nick Diaz.
But wouldn't it be crazy for Bisping to fight? Like, he's had that war with Silva. He got the quick win over Rockhold, the war with Dan Henderson, and then this would be his fourth fight in a calendar year.
I'm not opposed to the fight. I'm just saying, like, if you look at how, look, it's a super fight, and I'll always get excited for super fights. But if you're sort of looking at all the other sort of details, I don't really think it makes sense. But you're right. One of the biggest things that I thought about this GSP Bisping fight is let's leave out all the negotiations and everything and all that stuff. Would he even be cleared, medically cleared? He just went through this war. Would his stitches even be out of his face by the time he sort of made that walk? But you're right. It'd be amazing to see.
Yeah, and I mean, with everything that's going on, and Jordan Parsons being diagnosed with CTE, I'd be concerned if he's cleared by UFC 206 after going through all of that. So, I mean, it's an interesting one. But yeah, I agree with you guys. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. The Nick Diaz rumors, I mean, some new stuff came out. As a few sources saying his camps saying that Nick wants a lot of money for the fight and is denying rumors of being on that card. But certainly, it's an interesting position that they're finding themselves in this Canadian market. Just quickly, guys, I just want to pick your brain on something else. I mean, we weren't really supposed to talk about this, but I just want to quickly glaze over it while Mike Dyce is cleaning his dishes in the background there. What's going on back there, Mike? You
just dropping a plate in the kitchen.
How about that? That's a skill to know exactly when someone's in the kitchen. I have an eating obsession. We've all seen what's been going on with the UFC in terms of a lot of firings, especially when it comes to their employees around the world, Asia, Australia, Canada, just all over the place. Guys like Tom Wright being let go from the company. And it looks like there's going to be a big focus on, I suppose, putting on big fights locally. But, I mean, from the next calendar year, a lot of people are saying a lot less shows and a lot less of a focus globally. A lot less focus on shows and just putting on shows just to sort of break ground in a new country without really having much significance in that country. What do you guys think about this potential change? Do you think this is good from the perspective of, okay, it doesn't really make sense to go out to certain parts of Europe and do events early in the morning with sort of small cards that people don't really care about, and you have sort of bigger cards and less cards? Or are you guys sort of a bit worried about the fact that we might go back a little bit on the sport growing around the world? I will go with you first, Mike.
I'm not necessarily worried about them abandoning trying to grow the sport around the world. I think whenever a company buys another company, they're always looking to eliminate redundancies. And I think just having as many offices as they did was maybe redundant. Like, how many times a year do they go to Asia? Do they need an office to go there as frequently as they do? Do you need an office in Toronto when North America, the United States is right there? So I think it's kind of more of just a streamlining the operations standpoint. Yeah, them narrowing down the number of events will cause some places to lose fights, but I don't think that they're trying to pull back from their global appeal.
I think the other thing is you've got WME. I mean, they are already a full-fledged company. So you're right, Mike. They already have people that fit the job description that you sort of have in the UFC. Like, I know that one of the departments that sort of got downsized, or I don't know if they were completely fired, but I think like social media, like WME, they would already have their own sort of social media department. So I guess, unfortunately, and it sucks because people are losing their jobs, and now my heart goes out to those people. But unfortunately, I understand it from a business perspective. And I was, I guess, shocked to see Gary Cook leaving and Tom Wright. Tom Wright's a guy who's been here for, many, many events, and he's always sort of taken the duties on, kind of like the Dana White of this part in here in Australia, New Zealand, and in Canada as well. But, I mean, I guess you make a good point. If they've got an office up there, and there may be a new Tom Wright, just a guy from WME that we may see sort of, come through the smoke.
I'm actually a fan of having less shows. I feel like when there's too many shows, people just stop watching them because they have too much on. It doesn't make it a special. But I'm just curious to find out from you, Casper. Are you a fan of potentially there being less shows next year, or would you be disappointed if they dwindle down by a significant number?
As someone who covers the sport, I'm not opposed to it because I think anybody who's in MMA media feels the burn when you're watching a card and it's, say, on... the Fight Pass ones aren't too bad because they're usually pretty quick, but there are just certain cards that just really drag out and just endless commercials, and then, you got to sort of talk about it and write about it, and just sometimes there aren't really that many interesting stories coming out of it. So if you can have less shows, the product is less saturated, and you just have bigger fights... I mean, like, look at us. We're talking about UFC 206. Is it even pay-per-view worthy? And this is a pay-per-view. There are certain cards that you just think, like, wow, I do not know any of the people on this card. Like, I mean, these people, 50% of them don't even have, a Wikipedia page. So, and that's really sort of, I remember like years ago with the UFC, you would look at certain cards and just think, man, like these are just star-studded pay-per-views. You can't miss this one. So, yeah, I like that. I also just kind of wonder because when the UFC goes to these countries that aren't really, there's not a big MMA scene, usually when the UFC goes there, the scene grows. So I'm kind of wondering what will happen with sort of worldwide development and, will we see as many fighters coming out from certain countries? Because I think a lot of times if you go to those small countries, the fighters might think, well, we're a small country, I don't know, like, would I really want to be an MMA fighter? Like, yeah, I love it, but at the same time, what's my avenue? Where do I go? Whereas if there's sort of like, regional promotions that pop up in that country, I think it's a lot more likely. And I think a lot of times that starts at the UFC going there. So I'm curious what happens to sort of the global talent pool.
Yeah, what about you, Mike? Would you be disappointed if you saw a lot less UFC shows next year?
As somebody who covers the sport, you do feel the grind. This, we haven't had a fight since early October, and it's been weird, but also kind of nice. But I'm also at a point where I feel like I miss it and I don't know what to do with myself on Saturdays. So yeah, I appreciate, and I think that the cards, it could improve the cards and make the events more special. But at the same time, as you try to go global, there's a lot of mouths to feed and a lot of hands to feed. And part of the problem is the Fox cards or the televised cards, which tend to be the cards that we see more frequently in between pay-per-views that have to be scheduled out at a certain pace. And those ones are the ones that wear on. People are against Fight Pass, but as you mentioned, the Fight Pass cards go faster because they don't have to keep to a TV schedule. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see, but back to the global thing, the world is still demanding it. Like Real Madrid just came out and said they want to host a Conor McGregor fight in their stadium with 100,000 people. So the market's still there. They might, with more talented cards, be able to put on bigger shows around the world and make each one more meaningful that way by rescinding the number.
Yeah, a lot of things changing next year. And one of the big announcements this week was the fact that Uriah Faber said he was retiring after his fight at UFC Sacramento this December against Brad Pickett. A great fight, but what does this mean for the bantamweight division in terms of losing one of their biggest names? And this is a guy that has really helped grow the names of a lot of the fighters in the division that people didn't know. He was willing to fight guys with little name value, dangerous opponents, and really build their profile. Mike, First of all, how much do you think the UFC is going to miss having Uriah Faber in that bantamweight division?
From a purely company standpoint, I think maybe not as much as we would like to think, because it just creates an opportunity for fresh blood to come in and the next, wave of stars to come in, and you have something really interesting developing with the Cruz, Garbrandt, Dillashaw angle. And Faber will always be a looming figure as long as his gym is one of the top gyms in the sport, and he'll always be that mentor role. But you're right, he did take on fighters and opponents who were up-and-coming guys who needed a shot. It's that old wrestling adage, putting somebody over. Like he just did it at 203 with Jimmy Rivera. A lot of people didn't think that Jimmy Rivera was worth, a big fight like Faber, and he lost, or he beat Faber. So the one thing that really is kind of disappointing, though, is that we never got to see the Faber-Dillashaw fight.
Yeah.
There was a lot of people who wanted to see that after Dillashaw left, and there was the war of words and whatnot, and that angle. So, that's a storyline in the bantamweight division that was out there. That was a fight that you could book to try and make something interesting, a sellable fight, something to save the 206 card maybe, and they're passing up on it.
I also think an interesting fight would have been Brian Caraway versus Uriah Faber, even though Caraway's a little ahead in the rankings. I just feel like they both got this grappling style. I think that would have been an interesting matchup. And like Brad Pickett, it's almost weird because Brad Pickett has had really bad luck in the UFC recently. So it's kind of like a double loser leaves town match where like Uriah Faber, he will retire. But if he does beat Brad Pickett, what happens then to Brad Pickett? I mean, there's a good chance Brad's going to get cut from the UFC anyway. So it's kind of a weird situation. It's like, there's not really much on the line in this fight, I feel. I think the way the UFC are going to miss Uriah Faber is the fact that he's a guy who not only was he willing to take on guys with little name value, but he was always fine with being on the prelims, and he was a big name that you could put on either the Fight Pass prelims or the Fox prelims, and, these days the prelims have their own main event, and he was that guy. But I think it's actually a really, really good thing for the division. And like you mentioned, putting people over, giving people the rub, a lot of the times it just doesn't work out. Like for Jimmy Rivera, where he beats a legend and a guy like Uriah Faber, a lot of times I feel like there was this roadblock in the division that was Uriah Faber. He was a very good fighter. These guys would put on a decent streak. They'd start making a name for themselves. They'd come up against Uriah Faber and they'd lose. And then they'd be all the way back to the beginning. We saw it with guys like Michael McDonald. I'm low on names at the moment, but I feel like now there won't be that roadblock. And obviously it's not something you can hold against Uriah Faber. He's fighting. He, at that point was a contender, wanted to get in the title shot, but now that he's probably not going to get a title shot, it's probably kind of pointless to keep him around and, have him sort of stunt the growth of other potential stars. And I actually think the division is better than it's ever been. You got Dominic Cruz coming back. He's the champion. You got a guy like Cody Garbrandt. These guys are going to get a massive rub at UFC 207. The fact that they're competing under Ronda Rousey, a lot of exposure. You've got TJ Dillashaw, the former champ. You got John Lineker waiting in the wings. Brian Caraway, not a huge name, not the biggest fan favorite, but he's a tough guy. Who else? You got Aljamain Sterling, Thomas Almeida. There's a lot of exciting guys. I don't think the division desperately needs Uriah Faber as they once did.
Yeah, it's a shame to see him go, but it's great to see him sort of go out on his own terms. And you did see that slowdown over his last few fights. He didn't quite look the same. So it's good to see him go out before he's in any more fights where he gets seriously hurt. Or sort of, you wonder, why stick around and sort of ruin your legacy a little bit? It's best to leave while you're on top and while you're still performing at a higher level. So it'll be interesting. But it's funny how you mentioned that thing about Brad Pickett, Casper. I mean, one guy might retire, one guy might get cut, or both guys might retire in the night. It should be an interesting night in Sacramento.
Well, that's the other thing. Faber gets to go out in front of his hometown, which is another big moment for him, which may have forced him to make the decision.
Well, this is almost like the best scenario to go out on. I mean, like you mentioned, he hasn't gone on a long streak of losers. He's, 2 fights away from fighting for the title. Huge chance he beats Brad Pickett. Hasn't taken a crazy amount of damage. Probably going to go out on a win. And then he's got, he's turned MMA into a business for himself. This is the dream. This isn't, say, like a legend like Nogueira going out on a string of losses. This is pretty much the best way to go out in MMA for Faber.
Mike Dyce, a favorite Uriah Faber memory, if you have one, from his career, what stands out to you?
Oh, I don't know. Man, that's hard to pick one. his WEC days, dancing to like the cage, will just always kind of be a memory that stands out to me. You know, that I don't know. I just have this image of him just always smiling and like coming out to the cage. And you know, back that day, he used to wear it. Didn't he used to wear like the sweatbands and hats and stuff all the time too?
He had many, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. That's just kind of the image that sticks out of my mind when I think of Uriah Faber.
I always liked Uriah Faber. You know, the other thing about Uriah Faber that people don't realize is, I mean, he's been on our program many, many times. He's almost he is a Submission Radio alumni. There it is. And he's always been such a professional guy. He always knows how to promote a fight. And even though he's sort of had a few rough matchups and guys that people don't really know, he always sort of found a way to get people interested in those fights. So, I mean, from a promotional perspective and a business perspective, I mean, I've always been impressed with him and his professionalism. Casper, anything about Uriah that stands out in your mind that you're going to miss once he retires?
I think his positivity. He's a guy who had a really good energy about him. You know, we obviously, found this out through speaking to him many, many times. Like you mentioned, like even just giving us a chance back in the day when Submission Radio was still small and growing. Just a guy who always jumped at any opportunity to sort of promote himself, whether with a big outlet or a small outlet. And it's weird because he's this like nice guy. He's from California, but he's also like not only a good fighter, but just an incredibly, incredibly tough guy. One of my favorite Uriah Faber memories, it's one that he didn't even win, but just that fight against Jose Aldo where he got beat up, he took a lot of punishment, his leg was destroyed, but just the fact that he kept going and he kept sort of coming back for more. I know it's a weird sort of, I don't even know if I'd say a favorite moment, but it's just something that stands out to me, just his ridiculous toughness and I guess just the fact that he never has any quit in him, which is weird because he's such a nice, good-looking guy. You wouldn't expect it from it, but, there he is, the ridiculously tough Uriah Faber.
Oh, there you go.
And let's not forget the time when the girl broke into his house.
He was so cool about it. She came in, she took a big shit in his bathroom, then passed out. I wouldn't have been that cool about it.
Oh, man. He's always been such a cool guy. So I'm excited to see what happens in December at UFC Sacramento. But, guys, before we wrap this baby up, as people may or may not know, we like to do a sneaky movie review before we finish out a movie. We haven't done it in quite some time, but me and Casper recently watched Jack Reacher 2. We didn't go together. We went separately because we wanted to stay fair. We didn't want to affect each other's opinions. I wonder if we're going to have the same one, Cass. What did you think of Jack Reacher 2?
So bad. It was so terrible. And I'm a guy who really liked the first one. I thought the first one was awesome. I came in here with expectations. It was kind of on the sly. Like, there wasn't a big lead up where I knew, like, yes, this movie's coming out. I think you sent me the trailer. I didn't really watch it, but it was enough for me to get excited to know it's coming out. How dare you?
I sent it to you and you didn't watch it.
I know. I don't watch trailers these days because they spoil everything. Once I know I want to see a movie, that's enough for me. And it was so bad. It was everything that was good about the first Jack Reacher was completely missing from this one. I don't want to spoil the plot, but they try and add a dimension to Jack Reacher that I don't think should be there. They try and humanize him. They try and add a family aspect. All this stuff that you just don't care about. He's a badass. He's the problem solver. He's kind of, the silent but strong type, even though he's like 5 foot tall. That's what you want to see in Jack Reacher. And they just added all this crap. They added Kobe Smulders, who most people know as Robin Scherbatsky in How I Met Your Mother. Now, I loved her as Robin Scherbatsky. She was so good, such a good character, but she plays this like really cliche, ridiculously badass chick in this movie, and she's not really that much of a badass. There's like stupid arguments about like her whole role and like what a woman's place is and all this bullshit. I thought it was terrible. I was so bored. It was one of the few movies in my life where I was sitting there going, when will this finish? I just want this to finish so I can go home. I did not enjoy my experience. It gets a half Timothy Johnson mustache. That's the official review.
Out of 5.
Out of 5. The storyline was so stupid. I just did not care. Really bad watch. Don't go and watch it. Don't even pirate it. It's not even worth your data.
Not worth your data, even if you're on an unlimited plan. The first, they're based on a bunch of books, and this one is based on the 21st book, the 21st, I think, or the 22nd Jack Reacher book. They decided to jump that far for this one. I just I agree with you. The plot was real crap. Like, I still sort of got my Tom Cruise enjoyment out of this one, and this is why we're going to be doing our top 5 Tom Cruise list very soon, and Mike Dyce is going to surprise us, which I'm looking forward to. But, Tom Cruise in this movie as well, didn't really impress me. Like, he didn't give me all the Tom Cruisiness that I expect out of my Tom Cruise watching experience. He kind of looked a little bit like a leathery glove. Like, I'm used to seeing Tom Cruise. He kind of looked a bit older.
He aged,
but sort of aged, but he was trying to look young. And I don't know, to me, in the first one, he was like this cool badass dude that didn't really live anywhere and just got it on all these chicks and, you know, just lived life his own way. In this one, he just looked like some kind of hippie with like one set of clothes and like that's all he has. He has like, he's like a bit of a deadbeat and like he doesn't really know what the hell's going on. And I don't want to ruin the plot twists or anything, but for a guy that's supposed to be smart like Jack Reacher, like he doesn't come off very bright in this one. As a matter of fact, at the very start of the movie, I don't think I'm going to spoil anything by saying that he travels all the way up to have a date with Robert Schabotsky from How I Met Your Mother. I mean, that's not what Jack Reacher does. No. Jack Reacher gets it on with the ladies that are there, damn it. He doesn't travel around the world. That's the ultimate example of being pussy whipped. So, yeah, Jack Reacher, he gets, I'll give it to Timothy Johnson mustaches, but I really needed that choc top and popcorn and a large Coke to enjoy this one. So beware, people, beware. So there you go. But let's talk about our top 5 Tom Cruise list because, I mean, let's be honest. If someone's listening to this program now, they're not listening for the interviews with Tim Kennedy or Johny Hendricks or even a chat with Mike Dyce about UFC. They want to hear our top 5 Tom Cruise movie lists. And I'm trying to have a think because, I mean, Mike's got a surprise for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys my Tom Cruise list first. I think I'm going to put myself out there like that. I'm not ashamed to do it. I'm going to start with number 5, okay? So number 5 on my Tom Cruise top 5 movie list, Collateral, the movie with him and Jamie Foxx. I love that movie. He plays a hitman. He's a silver fox. And I think, number 5. I really struggled with this one. I thought, am I going to put it higher? Am I going to put it lower? But it fell at number 5 for me. Number 4, Edge of Tomorrow, which is a great movie. It's a more recent movie. A lot of people didn't really watch this movie. Make sure you check it out. It's the good one with Emily Blunt, not that Oblivion one, which is just, I really hated that one. Number 3, Top Gun. You know, you got that love and feeling. I've been in bars myself and sang it to girls before. Now, it didn't quite work out like it did from Tom Cruise, but it still holds a special place in my heart. Number 2, A Few Good Men. I mean, I know a lot of MMA fighters practice this when they think about what they're going to ask Dana White. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. Did you order that Conor McGregor fight? You goddamn right I did. So, A Few Good Men, number 2. And number 1, I guess you could relate this to GSP, Jerry Maguire. I mean, you can just imagine him on the phone right now. Show me the money. And
I think it'd be more like, Dana, show me the money, please.
Yeah, that's right. I love black people. No, so Jerry Maguire, it's a great movie. Cuba Gooding Jr. got an Oscar for that. I actually believe that Tom Cruise deserved an Oscar for that movie. So that's my Tom Cruise top 5 movies. Okay, Casper, let's do your list first because I want to keep Mike Dyce to last. I feel like he's going to shake things up.
I want to hear Dyce. I feel like we haven't heard from Dyce in a long time. He's sitting here, he's listening to ours. Should we go from?
You're not going to change anything on your list, are you, Cass? We just needed the confirmation.
My list is set. Like Han Solo in Star Wars when he gets frozen or whatever they do to him. Go for it, Mike. Let's hear your top 5 Tom Cruise movies.
Okay, I want to throw out an honorable mention to Cocktail. The movie where he's slinging drinks.
No idea what that movie is.
Where he's like trying to come up with the invention that'll make him a ton of money, and he calls it the Fugelbinder. Like, I use that word all the time.
Nice.
All right, number 5, Days of Thunder, a.k.a. the original yet less funny Talladega Nights, when he's playing a NASCAR race car driver. I'm from Texas. Brooks and Dunn does the soundtrack, so I'm set. Number 4.
A lot of these are just going straight over our heads, but there's a lot of people in Texas listening now, so they'll appreciate it. Go on, Mike.
They'll get it.
Yeah.
Brooks and Dunn, man, it's a great country music duo.
Okay.
All right, number 4. This is the one that I thought would be the curveball. Far and Away. It's Far and Away. It's the movie that he met Nicole Kidman, if I'm remembering correctly. This is the movie where he met Nicole Kidman while filming.
Okay.
Basically, they're like some Irish settlers in the United States, and they would do this thing where they would give away land in the United States, like in Oklahoma is where the movie takes place. and they would rush out and have to stake their like flag in this plot of land to claim it. They would do like a rush, like it was like a race, like everybody would do it at the same time.
Sounds
Anyways,
like getting interviews with MMA fighters for MMA media. He's mine.
Mike,
it's what basically.
It's an interesting choice. I mean, it's a romantic drama from 1992. Did you by chance choose this one because it was directed by a fellow ginger person by the name of Ron Howard?
Oh, first of all, not a ginger. Second,
how dare you call Mike a ginger?
We want the truth.
The reason why I really like it is because I went to the University of Oklahoma and their mascot is the Sooner, and it's all built around that land rush race thing that this movie centers around. So that's why it means something to me, I guess.
Okay.
Not because it's a decent movie.
Not because there's any gingers involved with the making of it.
Nicole Kidman, she was a ginger in that movie too.
Number 3, Mike. What have you got?
Top Gun, classic. You know, you gotta have it. 2, A Few Good Men, and 1 for me, Jerry Maguire.
Wow, so we've got the same top 3.
Bruce Springsteen, like you can't go wrong with Bruce Springsteen.
Secret Garden, like that's a great song to put on when you go on a date with a girl. Let me in your garden.
Baby making music.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, that's a respectable list. I like your list, Mike. All right, I'll hit you with mine. I'll try and make it quick. Now, I got to tell you, here's a sort of preface. I have not seen a lot of Tom Cruise's classic movies. I've got this thing where there's a lot of movies, they're classics. I know they're classics. I just haven't seen them. It goes with Al Pacino movies, De Niro movies. I haven't seen Casino. I haven't seen Goodfellas. And I haven't seen Days of Thunder. I haven't seen Jerry Maguire. I haven't seen Risky Business. I haven't seen Cocktail. I haven't seen Top Gun. And I haven't seen A Few Good Men. So if you're still listening and you haven't lost enough respect to tune out, I'll give you my top 5, which you're probably thinking like, who cares? What does it count? Honorable mentions, like the Honorable Mike Dyce. I have my own. War of the Worlds. Really enjoyed that movie. And Mission Impossible 2. I was a young kid when I saw it. I saw it with my dad. I think he stole the poster for me from the cinemas, my dad, because he's a criminal. And then I had that poster in my room for many, many years to follow. It was just cool. Tom Cruise, long hair. They were, they were like fighting on motorbikes. It was shot in Sydney. Thandie Newton's hot. There's a lot of things to like about that movie. Number 5, Mission Impossible, the first one. I feel like...
This was when you were in your Limp Bizkit phase?
Yeah, red hat and, walking around thinking that Roland was cool. Yeah, you know it, Mike. I thought the first Mission Impossible was awesome. You had kind of like all these spy movies and like, I don't know, I feel like with James Bond, he was so smooth and suave with everything, which is why he was one of my childhood idols. With James Bond, you never really worried. You just knew like, yeah, he's in a bad situation. He's going to get out of it. It's only a matter of time, whatever. Mission Impossible, it kind of seemed like they were always going to fail. Like, who could forget that scene where he's like in that room and it's like, if you blink, the alarm goes off. If there's a rise in temperature, the alarm goes off. If you sneeze, if you do anything, the alarm goes off. He's like hanging there on those wires. So Mission Impossible number 5. Collateral number 4, you mentioned Dennis. Tom Cruise with grey hair, being a bad guy. I don't know, I bought it. Jamie Foxx was good. Jack Reacher at number 3. I really enjoyed the shit out of that movie. Edge of Tomorrow, just a sick, awesome plot right there. I don't want to spoil anything, but if you haven't seen Edge of Tomorrow, you pretty much, your whole life has been a waste up until now, so go check it out. Just a really, really interesting movie. And number 1, my favorite Tom Cruise movie of all time, and I just saw it recently, Louis Theroux, my Scientology movie. He's great in that movie. So there you go.
I love him. Yeah.
For those,
he puts in his best performance.
Yeah. For those who haven't seen, have you seen Louis Theroux, my Scientology movie, Mike Dyce?
No, I haven't.
You should check it out. It's basically Louis Theroux interviewing a bunch of Scientologists and showing a lot of footage of Tom Cruise and showing off the wackiness that is. So it's a great
I'm really
performance.
surprised nobody brought up Eyes Wide Shut.
Eyes
Wide Shut.
That was a good movie for about 5 minutes. That weird sex scene where everyone's wearing masks and stuff. It's the only part that's worth watching.
I got a couple of movies as well here that are honorable that I probably should mention. Minority Report, I really enjoyed, and Last Samurai, which is good.
Last Samurai was good, yeah.
And another weird movie we didn't really mention was Vanilla Sky. What the hell happened in that movie?
That was a terrible movie. There's only one thing I remember from that movie, and that was Cameron Diaz in a car. She was angry about something, and she's like, I swallowed your cum 4 times. That's the only part I remember. And then she pulled the steering wheel, and they went off a bridge. That's it. Bizarre movie.
Wow.
Well, no risky business either from anybody, which I thought was going to be
risky business is good. You know, he's young,
But then-
he's nubile. He has it is an iconic moment when he's dancing in the socks.
No Tropic Thunder.
Yeah, he was great in that.
I feel he was great in Tropic Thunder, but why are you making us feel bad, Mike? Did you mention Tropic Thunder in your list? Did you have it in your honorable mentions? He's twisted and turning it. He was great in Tropic Thunder, but I think it was more like a cameo. I feel like his role wasn't long enough to warrant this. But there you guys go, our top 5 Tom Cruise movies. Mike, we're going to have to do this regularly. We'll do a different list for another actor next. I have a feeling it's going to be somewhere around Nicolas Cage or around Air Force. So just be prepared, because that should be an interesting discussion as well. But guys, that is the end of Submission Radio for this week. Big thanks to Mike Dyce. Thank you for coming onto the program, Mike. Before we wrap this up, I just want to make sure everybody follows you on Twitter at Mike Dyce, and check him out and Elias, killing it on a weekly basis on Extra Rounds podcast. So many great guest appearances. You guys recently had a fun interview there with Conor McGregor, a bunch of other fun things going on. Really enjoy what you guys are doing. You guys can check that out via TuneIn, iTunes. Follow the show on Twitter at Extra Rounds. We love Jose Youngs. He's on there as well. So it's a real good group of guys talking about MMA. Make sure to check it out. And also, Mike, before we let you go, let the people know what's coming up on Fansided that people can check out this week. Is there anything fun, anything new, anything you want to mention?
We got some features. We just had one go up with TJ Dillashaw today. We got one with Holly Holm coming. We got one with Mickey Gall. And we'll be in New York for UFC 205, so we'll have a lot of cool stuff coming.
We'll be in New York together. I mean, last time, I don't know if people...
man. There goes my wallet.
Next to each other. That's right, buffets. So I freaked out Mike Dyce when I went up to the chef and asked him for all this turkey skin. Just left the turkey on the plate, just walked up with the skin, and people were like, security. So now it should be great times. Guys, that's it for us this week. Big thank you to Bas Rutten. Big thank you to Johny Hendricks. Big thank you to Tim Kennedy. Big thank you to Karim Zidan for letting us know exactly what's going on in the crazy world of Russian MMA. Big thank you to Mike Dyce. A big thank you to you for tuning in this week. We'll be back next week breaking down the UFC Tony Ferguson RDA card, and also talking about what's given a bit of a preview for UFC 205, a couple of fun guests for that one. Until then, we'll catch you next week.